Chapter 1. The Start of a Journey. Young Midoriya, will you inherit my quirk? Toshinori looked at the surprised boy. Midoriya looked at his favorite hero and began to tear up before nodding enthusiastically. The pro hero smiled and waited as the young boy got up, wiping his face with his school uniform sleeve. He looked happily at the lanky man, but then expressed a sense of uneasiness. What is wrong, my boy? Toshinori walked up to the boy. Midoriya looked up at him, then looked down at his hand, clenching it, then loosened it. He looked up at the man. What about my other quirk? Toshinori looked at him confused. You have a quirk? How come you didn't use it when you saved that Bakugo kid? Midoriya deadpanned at the hero as he sighed and brought out a handbook from the Japanese government and showed him a page. The law states that, without a license, quirk usage is strictly prohibited. Toshinori smacked his forehead as he forgot about that rule. He nodded and motioned for him to follow him. The boy quickly put the handbook back in his bag and hurried after the hero. They walked along the sidewalk, passing by commuters as they seemed to walk aimlessly, until they reached a local cafe. They were seated as Toshinori told Midoriya that he could get anything he wanted as he ordered a parfait, and the boy finally decided on the crepe. So kid, what's your quirk? Toshinori said as they waited for their food. Midoriya took a sip from his tea and held the base of the cup with both of his hands. My quirk allows me to have control over the sun and moon, hence the name of it, celestial homage. From controlling sunlight and moonlight to materializing weapons that are related to those two entities. After doing research about it, and ended up stumbling upon gods with the domains of the sun and moon, and after spending a lot of time, my conclusion was that the quirk was most tied to the twin archers of Greek legend and the Japanese legend of Amaterasu and Tsukuyomi. Midoriya said as he searched his bag before taking out a notebook and gave it to Toshinori. He opened it and examined the contents of it, from descriptions of those four gods/goddesses to sketches of weapons and stuff that apparently were related to them. Descriptions of bows, a sword, a naginata, and a shield were some of the stuff that were sketched. He closed the book and examined the cover. So, you've researched the background of the sun and moon, and you came up with this? Pretty impressive, kid. Do you have experience with using your quirk? Toshinori asked, and smiled as his parfait arrived. Midoriya nodded and held out his hand. Light accumulated in his before he made it disappear. Toshinori looked impressed. I heard that Bakugo kid call you quirkless. Why? Midoriya had a small smile on his face as his crepe soon arrived after. I don't use my quirk outside of practicing at home, or at a place where no one can bother me, nor notice me. I just like it that way. Midoriya placed his drink down and stared at the hero. Toshinori was weighing his options before nodding and handing the boy a piece of paper. Midoriya picked it up and saw a phone number written on it. He looked up at the lanky man as he got up and began to walk out of the cafe. Make sure you add me to your contacts. I'll text you where to meet me for your training. Don't worry, I've already paid the bill. Until next time, young man. Toshinori waved as he walked out of the building and disappeared in the wave of people passing through the area. Midoriya looked at the paper and grabbed his phone from his pocket and added him into his contacts. He shot the hero a text, and a couple of seconds later, his phone buzzed on the table. He picked the phone up and looked at the message. Meet me at the Takoba Seaside Bay at 5 o'clock in the early morning. We will start your training then. Midoriya paled at the early time, but nodded and exited the cafe, the lingering memory of his idol asking him to inherit his quirk, even if he had no clue what and how he could do that. He was in a much better mood when he arrived at his house. Midoriya grabbed the mail and entered the house, smelling the warm aroma of katsudan. He smiled and walked into the living room, seeing his mom cooking with a smile on her face. She saw her son from the corner of her eye and continued to cook the meals. Hello, son. How was your day? Inko Midoriya smiled as she washed her hands and looked up at her son. The boy walked up and sat down at one of the chairs in the living room and cracked open one of his notebooks and began to write something down on it. Things are going good, Mom. How are you? Midoriya said while he was entirely focused on making new tabs for the new pro heroes Kimui Woods and MT Lady, and began to jot down several things about each of them. He did a once-over and nodded before closing the notebook and grabbed a piece of paper and began to write down even more stuff on it. Curious, Inko walked over and saw the title of the paper. UA Entrance Exam Training Goals. Are you planning on taking the entrance exam coming up soon? Dear, it's about 10 months until then. Remember to relax and don't wear yourself out until then. Try to train and then take a break, rinse and repeat. Inko said before turning back around and headed into the kitchen. Midori sighed before looking at the paper in his hands before quickly running up into his room and taped the paper to his door. He nodded and ran back downstairs as his mother called for dinner. After a delicious meal made by his mom, Midoriya retired for the night and laid on his bed while reminiscing what happened today. He shook his head as he played the events through his mind, still surprised at the sudden developments that transpired today. Midoriya wasn't complaining about it. In fact, he was quite thrilled and astonished that he got to meet his idol, even though he revealed what happened to him, which kind of bummed Midoriya out a little as his idol's true form was, for the lack of a better term, unimpressive. He chuckled before setting his alarm to 4:30 as the walk to Takoba wasn't that far away from his home, and he waited before succumbing to the relief of stress. The next day, Midoriya grunted as he jogged all the way to where Toshinori wanted to meet him so that he could start his training. After jogging for a couple of minutes, he managed to keep up his pace and eventually he arrived at the beach. He saw All Might's bulky physique and rushed over to him. The pro hero turned and his trademark grin on his face as he saw Midoriya running up to him. "Ah, young Midoriya, are you ready to start your training?" Midoriya nodded. All Might noticed the silver glow around the boy, and his eyes were a silvery green. He felt a calming, serene feeling from the young boy. "What's up with your eyes and the sort of silver aura around you?" he said as he bent down and looked at the boy. "It's just an effect of my quirk. Since the moon is up, my lunar powers are more enhanced while solar powers are reduced to a mostly defensive quirk as the power is reduced significantly. Same goes the other way around. I'll demonstrate." Midoriya then turned to a trashed washing machine, and his hands started to glow silver before snapping his fingers. A beam of moonlight came crashing down and obliterated it, leaving a small crater. Then, he turned to a broken fridge and his hand glowed an orange-yellow and sent a beam of sunlight at it. But when it reached the target, the beam stopped in place before falling down to the ground and disappeared. No scorch marks or signs of damage to it. All Might somehow felt very depressed by the lack of power in his solar problems, but he understood the drawbacks as it made sense. "Very impressive, young Midoriya. But why hide your powers to your classmates? Surely with the power you have, I'm pretty sure you would have been guaranteed a recommendation to UA," All Might said as he stretched his arms, sighing in content when he heard his shoulder popping. He looked at the boy, who was in deep thought. "To be honest, I was actually quirkless until 3 years ago. When I woke up that day, I suddenly had them. I don't know all the details, but after being called quirkless your entire life, I guess you become more reserved. That's why I never told anyone except for my mom, and now you, All Might." "I see. Well, forget about that now. We have some training to do. Here is your plan for the next 10 months, as the entrance exam will be taking place in 10 months. Your body is developed, but you still need the training. The reason I chose this place for your training is to train your body while cleaning up this beach." Oh yeah, this spot was a tourist attraction and pretty popular in the past, but ever since then, it's been deserted and trashed. Well, it would be nice to clean up this place, Midoriya said as he looked at the massive amount of garbage stacked up on top of each other. "All right, let's begin your training." All Might bellowed as he fist-pumped the air. Midoriya mimicked his mentor's actions, and just like that, they began the training. Training with the best hero in the world was rather grueling as Midoriya panted, carrying his mentor in the morning with the sun basking them in warm sunlight. It rejuvenated Midoriya as he continued to carry All Might around the beachside before he then got to work on the piles and piles of trash. Midoriya was about to just vaporize the trash with his solar powers, but All Might told him to train his body first. Then he would start working on perfecting his quirk and the power he was going to inherit from All Might. That got the young boy pumped as he kept his pace and started to clean the beach, using his solar and lunar powers to help with some of the heavy lifting, which included All Might sitting on a fridge. When he wasn't training, he was studying his quirk, seeing if he could get some influence and try some new things as his quirk was rather broad. He started to look at numerous applications, then he wrote them in his notebook. After looking at all the things he wrote down, he circled medicinal and healing for his solar power and lunar power, and circled water manipulation for his lunar powers as his first thing he wanted to practice on. He walked out of his house and looked around before noticing a dying flower in front of his house. He bent down and decided to try it out. He concentrated his power into his hand and enveloped the flower with his solar power. The flower began to glow before it stood right back up, causing Midoriya looked at his hand before smiling at the flower and stood up. He took out his notebook and wrote for vegetation a check mark. Then he wrote down human under healing. He put away his notebook and walked off to the gas station for some green tea. At night, he went down to Takoba and stood at the shallow end of the beach. His skin glowed silver as he meditated and concentrated his lunar powers, and he felt the tug of connection as he opened his eyes and placed his hands above the water surface. He glanced at the water as it was attracted to his hand, and watched as the water levels of the shallow end were slowly rising, in accordance with his hands. He dropped his hands and deactivated his power, causing the water to drop down to its regular level. He walked out of the shallow end and glanced at the moon, calming his nerves every time he looked at it. Midoriya sat down and listened to the crashing of the waves and the serene feeling he felt when he relaxed in the moonlight. After the first 5 months passed, Midoriya managed to clean the entire beach with the help of his quirk. He felt his body changing as he looked at himself in the mirror, seeing his body more defined and a growing six-pack. He flexed a little and saw his arm and leg muscles also built. He smiled as his training with All Might was keeping his body in tip-top form. All Might was impressed with his students' accomplishments and looked at the spotless beach, causing his grin to widen as he then plucked a strand of hair and approached the young boy. Young Midoriya, you have far exceeded my expectations and even cleaned this beach in half the time. I believe you are ready to inherit my power. Please, eat this. He presented his strand of hair to Midoriya, who looked at it then to the hero before looking back at the strand. Seriously? Midoriya deadpanned as he grabbed the strand of hair and looked at the bashful look on All Might's face. Well, yes, but it isn't ideal. But you need to consume my DNA to inherit my quirk, one for all. The quirk is a combination of 2 quirks, one to stockpile power and the other to transfer the quirk to others. With this, my boy, you will become the 9th holder of this quirk. I'm sure you will be able to even surpass me and become the greatest hero of all time. All you got to do is believe in yourself and to always give your plus ultra. All Might said and gestured Midoriya to ingest the strand. After his idle pseudo-speech, he calmed his nerves and ate the strand. He swallowed it as he felt disgusted, but deemed it necessary and held his stomach. After a couple of seconds, he felt nothing and looked at All Might. Nothing has happened yet. All Might chuckled and walked up to the boy's side. You have inherited my quirk. How about you try a smash? Do a Detroit smash. All Might said and punched out a Detroit smash, causing a huge amount of force to suddenly appear and separate the ocean water, creating a path before everything went to normal. Midoriya looked on in amazement before looking focused and reeled his hand back. Detroit smash. He punched out, sending a Detroit smash, but suddenly, a huge amount of pain soared through up his arm as several of his muscles instantly tore. His arm started to bleed profusely as Midoriya tried to hold in his tears as the pain he felt was unbearable. All Might rushed up to the boy and started to panic. He was about to take him to a hospital, but Midoriya stopped him. He held up his hand, and it started to glow silver as the moon seemed to glow even brighter, and it seemed to be in sync with his arm. His hand slowly started to repair itself as the green-haired boy felt the pain go away, and he slowly stood up, but almost fell. He was caught by All Might, and the pro hero noticed that his pupil fell asleep and grinned. I'm proud of you, my boy, All Might said as he looked at the moon, which glowed even brighter than it was before. The calming presence once again rolled over the hero. Ever since Midoriya inherited One for All from All Might, he's been training both that and celestial homage. He slowly managed to get OFA under control, and he got it to the point where he wouldn't get hurt from the first couple of times he used it, but he would eventually break several of his fingers and then his arms. Then, he would heal with either his sunlight or moonlight. It helped him with his endurance with OFA while improving his healing with his other quirk. He would also train with his attacks for celestial homage. He trained the quirk by creating mini targets with the light energy as he figured out to manipulate the energy that way. albeit small, but he got somewhere with it. He launched several beams of moonlight and watched as it blew up his training dummy. When he was training with sunlight, he noticed that he pierced anything due to the speed of his attacks for sunlight. Next, once he was done training his quirk, he would focus on the weapons that he could summon. For solar, he could summon a bow, shield, and a sword. Due to his research, he called them Apotheon bow, dazzling mirror, and Regalian sword. For lunar, a bow, some daggers, and a crescent blade Naginata. He named them Artemisian bow, moonlight daggers, and lunaric Naginata. He trained with all of them, and was most intrigued by the mirror as it absorbed any projectile and would launch it back. It also could reflect any attack. He paired it with the sword and sparred All Might with it. He managed to keep pace with the hero as his speed was increased during both times of day. He lost due to All Might's endless stamina and Midoriya's sluggish movements. He wrote in his notebook that he needed more weapons training with a sword, and even the Naginata and daggers. He did feel comfortable with the bows as it sort of came naturally for the young boy. Bullseye, Midoriya said as he had his Artemisian bow out and hit several bullseyes in a row. All Might nodded as he saw his students steadily increase in power over his quirks. Midoriya panted as he had no arrows, but he was able to create them when he drew the string back, but it whittled his energy down little by little. He counted 30 arrows before he couldn't do anything. He tested it out with his Apotheon bow and got the same result. He did quickly regain his energy as it seemed like the two celestial bodies rejuvenated his energy. The next 5 months had passed, and Midoriya grew so much in just that amount of time. With his training with OFA, he managed to get down 15% with his training method for it. Use OFA until his body started to break down, and then use his healing to repair any damage that he had sustained until he got to the point where he could use OFA in an extensive period of time without destroying his body. For Celestial Homage, he managed to master the bow and created several new attacks for both solar and lunar energies. He also created several defensive skills from his sparring matches with All Might. Midoriya's body was well developed as he finished his final training for the 10 months and smiled at his mentor, who was currently in his lanky state. "The exam is today, are you ready?" Toshinori said as he glanced over his pupil, seeing the determination on his face. Midoriya nodded and gave his mentor a thumbs up before running off to the Hero Academy. Toshinori smiled as he watched his student slowly disappear from sight, and then turned to the sunrise and smiled at it, the wind gently blowing as it felt like a very good day. Midoriya ran with excitement as he waited long for this day to come. He passed numerous people as he made his way to his dream school. He got there and looked at it with amazement as he saw streams of people entering the premises, most likely to take the entrance exam. "Whoa," he said as he looked at the academy as he made his way to the designated area to take the written portion of it. He looked at the scenery with a big smile on his face as he made his way into the building he was assigned to and sat down at the room 204. He noticed several other people already there, but they all sat in the back of the room. He decided to sit in the front of the class and waited as more and more people trickled in little by little until it was time to take the test. The chaperone closed the door and began to explain the test. After the long lecture, she placed the paper down on the table. "All right, you may begin the test." Midoriya flipped the front page and looked at the questions before sighing. He breezed through the entire test, as he expected the test to be easy as he studied for it in the last 10 months. Plus, he had an actual hero with him for help. Midoriya was the first one to finish and stood up to turn it in. The examiner looked at him with a smug look on her face as she grabbed his paper. "Are you sure you want to turn this in now? You have 45 more minutes to finish the test. I highly doubt that someone that actually wants to attend UA will take so little time on a test," she said. Midoriya didn't say anything as he nodded and went back to his seat, not caring about the words she said. He noticed several other people snickering at him, while others looked at him with condescending looks. He felt nervous with all the looks he was getting, but he felt really confident in his answers as the next 45 minutes, people were turning in their tests while giving Midoriya looks as they passed by his desk. After the last person turned their test in, the examiner left the room with the stack of tests, and soon, people were talking about Midoriya and how he basically rushed through the test, or so they think. He rushed through the test. Well, one less person that isn't fit to be a hero. What an idiot. I'm so glad that I took my time on it. I have a chance of passing it. Midoriya sighed as he fiddled with his thumbs, waiting for the exams to be graded and the grade to be announced. The intercom came on and told everyone to report to the auditorium near the entrance of the building. Everyone grabbed their stuff and went to the designated area, laughing and joking about stuff, while others were talking about the top scores on the written test. Midoriya noticed the snickering faces of people as he walked by them, and decided to ignore them even though his heart was pounding from all the attention he was getting. Once they reached the destination, they were asked to be seated by the chaperones. Midoriya noticed the examiner of the room he was in and saw her looking at him with a dismissive attitude. She then nudged a couple of her colleagues and pointed to him. They all started to laugh as several others were chuckling. Midoriya just sighed as a spokesman walked up to the stage. The results of the written portion are as followed. Out of the 600 people that took the exam, only 350 people passed the exam. Gasps were heard as the expressions of people varied from smirks to grimaces to fear as they heard the number of people that passed. Out of the 350 people who passed, only a single person got a perfect score on the exam. Midoriya turned and saw a guy with glasses looking smug at the spokesperson. He was telling a couple of his friends and the people around him that he got the perfect score, and people believed him. I know who he is. He's the boy that was top honors in his junior high, and even had a powerful quirk. People already were talking about him being the few to receive a perfect score on the written exam. Midoriya turned back towards the spokesperson as he shuffled the cards and stopped at one. All right, the person with the perfect score is me, Izuku Midoriya. The boy's smug grin quickly disappeared as he heard the name of the person that got a perfect score. Midoriya looked at the man in surprise. Izuku Midoriya, would you please come to the stage? Midoriya sighed as he stood up, causing several gasps to be heard in the auditorium. The green-haired boy made his way to the stage, noticing all the looks he was getting, especially the look the arrogant boy and his examiner. No way. He's the guy that finished the test first. It must be a joke, there's no way. Maybe he cheated or bribed his way. Midoriya arrived of the stage and shook the man's hand. The man smiled as he handed Midoriya a piece of paper stating that he got a perfect score on the exam and gave him a medal. He patted the boy on the shoulder. I heard you finished the exam in less than 10 minutes, and yet, you got the perfect score on it. I'm impressed with your studious behavior, young man. I can already tell you'll go far in life at UA and be a fine hero. Congratulations, Izuku Midoriya, you passed the exam. Midoriya smiled and shook the guy's hand before walking out of the auditorium, still feeling the malice of all the people in there. He sighed and looked at the paper stating his success and grinned before waiting for the next exam to begin. He felt energetic as the sun beamed down on him, calming his nerves and giving him excitement as he ran around the school, taking in the rest of sights of UA and its massive center building where all the classes were. He stood in front of it and smiled as he walked around the campus some more, seeing people walking in and out of the building, from students to parents. Excuse me, do you know where the main office is at? Midoriya turned around and his breath faded away from him. He saw a girl about a year older than him. Her curvaceous and mature figure coupled with her onyx eyes and black hair in a spiky ponytail with bangs covering her right side. Needless to say, he found her very beautiful to the point where it almost fried his brain completely. But he remembered her question and awkwardly rubbed the back of his neck. Sorry, but I don't know either. 2M here to take the entrance exam, he said, fumbling over his words as he never had talked to a girl before other than his mom, but that didn't count. The girl looked rather downcast, but she then smiled at him. I see. Well, that's all right. And you said you were taking the entrance exam, right? So, you'll be attending UA, and I'm assuming the hero course, right? Midoriya nodded, while trying to hid his blush, as she was really pretty to him, and her voice sounded really nice. Well, what about you? Midoriya asked. She smiled and shook her head. Actually, I got into UA through a recommendation, although sometimes I felt like I don't deserve it, unlike others in my school. She smiled sadly as she looked at the ground. Midoriya noticed her mood change and quickly walked up to her. I'm sure you earned that recommendation. I mean, you must have a pretty strong quirk, he said, trying to cheer the girl up. After a little more, she smiled back at him, and wiped a couple of tears that fell down her face. He sighed as he calmed her down, before a light bulb appeared above his head. "Oh yeah, speaking of which, what is your quirk?" Midoriya and the girl ended up sitting down at one of the benches as they walked and talked. "My quirk is called creation, which allows me to use my fat cells to create any non-living object through exposed skin, but I need to know the components and makeup of the object I want to create. Naturally, I need to eat a lot of fatty foods in order to have more fat cells, and the bigger the object, the more skin I need to expose, which, creates a lot of unwanted attention," she said and blushed a bit. Midoriya also blushed, but she understood what she was talking about, as she was very beautiful and a very well-endowed body. It surprised him that a girl about his age has a body that rivals a grown woman is beyond him, but he liked that she had a sense of maturity. She smiled and then held out her hand. "I forgot to introduce myself. My name is Momo Yaoyorozu." Midoriya blushed even more as he gingerly took her hand, but quickly released it and apologized. She smiled and waved him off. "My name is Izuku Midoriya," he said as he rubbed the back of his neck and chuckled. "Well, it's nice to meet you, Midoriya. May I ask, what's your quirk?" she said as she leaned closer to him. Midoriya blushed as he smelled her perfume. He was slowly losing his mind. After calming down, he looked up at her, curiosity on her face. He gulped and held out his hand, and she stared in interest as his hand began to glow an orange-yellow. "My quirk allows me to have the powers of the sun and moon. Here, give me your hand." She looked at him before reluctantly placing her hand on his, and waited for something bad to happen, but instead she felt something warm and comforting. She looked down and noticed a small fireball dancing around her hand. Yaoyorozu looked at Midoriya in surprise as he controlled the fireball before tossing it in the air, and it disappeared. "How?" She looked at him with confusion. "It comes in the territory of the power of the sun, which is essentially a big ball of gas and fire. My quirk allows me to use solar and lunar powers in any way I see fit. I can either hurt or heal someone. The downside is that if it's daytime, then my lunar power will be reduced to defense only, and vice versa. I can even create objects from sunlight and/or moonlight." He closed his eyes and concentrated on his hand before condensing the power and gave it a form. He opened his eyes and Yaoyorozu looked at his hand with disbelief, a simple gold necklace with a red gem at the center. "Here, take it." Midoriya handed it to her, but she was about to decline it. After a couple of seconds later, she nodded and placed it around her neck and marveled at the beauty and simplicity of it. She smiled at him, which caused him to blush and look away in embarrassment. The intercom came on and advised the people who were taking the entrance exam to start heading towards the main auditorium of the campus to begin the second part of the exam. Midoriya nodded and stood up, stretching his stiff arms. "Well, I guess this is my cue to go. It was nice meeting you, Yaoyorozu," Midoriya said and held out his hand to help her up. She smiled and grabbed it before pulling herself up with his help. She then asked for his phone and he nodded, giving her his phone and waited as she fiddled with it for a few seconds before handing it back to him. "I gave you my contact information. It was nice to meet you. Make sure pass the exam and tell me how it went," Yaoyorozu said. Midoriya blushed even more, but he nodded and began to walk towards the auditorium. She waved at him as he walked off. "Good luck, Midoriya," she yelled out as she saw his figure going out of view. She smiled and blushed as she gave him her contact information. She then blushed even more as she brushed the necklace he gave her and gripped it before smiling. She felt so calm around him, and the stress she felt before meeting him faded away. She felt calm and peaceful around him. She felt protected, to say the least. "Please, be safe." She chuckled as she shook her head. She believed he would pass the exam. She sighed and looked up at the sun. The warm feeling she felt as the sun touched her skin felt the same way being near Midoriya felt. And she loved it. Chapter 2. Showing of Power. Midoriya walked into the building and took a seat at the near back, as he still got stares at the auditorium. "That's the kid that rushed through it and got perfect score on it. Do you think he cheated?" He just wanted to start the second phase of the exam and get away from all the gossip and utter nonsense. He waited as more and more people trickled in, noticing several of his classmates walking, and then he saw Bakugo walking a ways behind them. He had an annoyed look on his face as he turned and glared straight at him. Midoriya just looked at him as the blonde sat on the end of his row and placed his feet on the chair in front of him, giving glares at anyone who glanced at him. Once the auditorium filled up, the lights began to darken as a figure walked up to the stage. Spotlights turned on and focused on that one person, and Midoriya started to look on with excitement. "Hey everybody, welcome to the entrance exam. Can I get a hi-yi?" The pro hero present Mike yelled, and then cupped his ear towards the crowd. But silence was heard as he continued to cup his ear for a good 30 seconds while Midoriya was geeking out and looking at the pro hero. "Oh my gosh, that's present Mike. I always tune in onto his talk shows. So cool," Midoriya said as he was bouncing in his seat. "Damn nerd," Bakugo mumbled as he shoved his hands into his pockets. Murmurs were heard around the room as people were looking at the pro hero weirdly as he chuckled and glanced around the room. "Tough crowd, eh? Probably from the written portion." But present Mike pressed a button from somewhere and a screen popped up. It then moved to a slide with 4 silhouettes of some kind of robots and a picture of a city. Then, point values appeared next to a picture ranging from 0 to 3. Midoriya stopped geeking, and he started to become serious as he waited for present Mike to continue. "This next part of the exam is a practical exam." People began to get excited as he then explained the rules, from the time limit of 30 minutes to the dreaded 0-pointer. He then told everyone to go to their designated battle area. Midoriya sighed in relief as he didn't see Bakugo amongst his group, but he did see the glasses guy that literally questioned almost everything during the explanation. He calmed his nerves as he waited for the exam to begin, and he channeled a bit of OFA through his legs as he looked up and saw the sun beaming down on him, almost like it was smiling at him. He then looked to the closed door of his area, and his eyes changed from green to orange-yellow as he saw the doors opening and immediately zoomed past the rest of the group. "Apotheon!" Midoriya yelled as he felt the familiar grip of the sun bow, and quickly destroyed 5 robots with the sunlight arrows as it pierced through the buildings as well. He left his stunned group as he continued to block lasers from the robots with his crescent wall and destroyed more robots, piercing through all of them with clean precision shots. He didn't look back as he left a mess of robot remains as the rest of the group looked on with shock. "What the? Why are you guys still in your area? Villains don't wait on heroes." Present Mike boomed over the intercom, knocking people out of their stupor, and they slowly followed the mess of robots left by Midoriya. Several explosions could be heard as robots were being destroyed left and right. Several of the UA staff were watching the exam as they started to scout out promising students. They currently had 2 screens dedicated to that, showing the progress of Midoriya and Bakugo as they made their way deeper into the city replica. That Bakugo has some serious combat experience, the pro hero Snipe said as he watched Bakugo destroying a couple of 3-pointers without much problem, causing several of the other heroes in the room to nod in agreement. The kid, Midoriya, rushed the written portion of the exam and even started the practical without having the need of an announcement. Kid has some quality hero instincts, pro hero Ectoplasm noted. Toshinori smiled as he saw his pupil showing off his powers as he saw Midoriya using OFA in his legs to help better propel himself across the city. His grin grew wider when he saw him protect a downed student and took her to safety. Several of the judges smiled as they began to take note of Midoriya. "That's it, my boy. Show them what a hero is." Midoriya dodged a laser beam and quickly sent a beam of light that pierced the armor and exploded. He dematerialized Apotheon in order to avoid using too much of his energy as he dodged yet another attack and punched several robots, and swiftly turned to Roundhouse 1, trying to back attack him. Several explosions sounded off as he continued to run, while stopping to help people if they were in trouble. So far, I have 57 points. I'm keeping a solid pace, just need to watch how much I use my energy. OFA is fine as I'm just using it to increase my leg strength and the occasional smash. Alright, time to keep on going, Midoriya said as he once again ran off, this time summoning Dazzling Mirror and Regalian Sword as he continued to run deeper into the city, slashing several robots in the process. He eventually made it to a big intersection as he felt immediate danger and quickly put up a crescent barrier, blocking the incoming fire from the robots as they ended up surrounding him and started to blast everything they had at him. He grunted as he felt the sure lead begin to crack. Damn, dazzling shield. He sent the mirror up into the air, causing the robots to start shooting at it. But the mirror absorbed all of the attacks the robots sent. He breathed in and exhaled before thrusting his arm up, and it began to glow as the mirror absorbed more and more until his hand was glowing brightly that it almost blinded him. Repercussive storm. He sent the energy he was building up and launched at the mirror. The mirror turned so that the glass faced the beam, and once it struck, the beam dispersed into numerous beams as it reflected off of the glass. But it gained all the energy that was in the attacks of the robots as it hummed, and then a huge beam shot out of the mirror. Midoriya quickly made a moonlight barrier as it came crashing down on him and the robots surrounding him, creating an immense pressure that cracked the concrete underneath him as he tried to keep the barrier up, but the power of the beam was beginning to crack his barrier. He grunted as sweat began to get into his eyes, causing them to burn a bit and his eyes to water. The beam finally stopped and dissipated, creating a crater around Midoriya. He immediately collapsed to his knees and panted heavily while he surveyed the destruction that the mirror did. After he caught his breath, he noticed the mirror slowly disappeared and turned into a ball of light that went into his body. The boy felt a little bit better as he felt some of his energy was replenished, but still was pretty tired from that attack. Note to self, don't use it unless I really need to. Plus, don't be in its range, as using a barrier seriously drained my power and it almost took me out of the fight. Need more control and training, but really surprised that the mirror can be that powerful. Midoriya hopped off of his little platform and continued on his adventure as he slashed through robots on the way, ever increasing his already high score. Several of the judges were impressed by his power and technique as he gracefully sliced through any robot that got in his way. Kid's really powerful, Snipes said, looking at Midoriya slashing his way through the city, and his point counter steadily increasing. He looked really stunning when he was on his knees. The risque 18+ hero Midnight said as she licked her lips as she stared at Midoriya and started to rub her thighs together. Illicit relations with a student is prohibited, Midnight. Don't try anything funny, Cementos said, crossing his arms. She sighed and shrugged as they continued to watch the ongoing exam. What do you think, Principal Nizu? Midnight looked over to the big chair in the center of the room, which was currently occupied by a small dog beer mink type animal, as the said animal was sipping a cup of tea. Well, everyone is working hard, so I say they are doing their best in this exam. However, Power Loader, can you please send them? The animal looked over at the hero. He nodded and opened up a case that had a big red button in it. He pressed the button, which caused the ground of the exam grounds to start shaking as buildings started to collapse due to the destruction of some of the examinees. Midoriya stopped as he felt the shaking of the ground, shooting a beam of light to his right, piercing 3 robots that tried to sneak upon him. He looked around as he saw multiple buildings crumbling as he tried to find the source of the trembles, and he ended up meeting with a ton of people that were in his designated area. He watched them clean up the robots in the area as he still tried to find the source of the tremors. What's causing the trem? Midoriya quickly dodged as several lasers suddenly appeared, and some even nicked him. He gritted his teeth as he landed on his feet while clutching his wound on his cheek. He looked where the lasers were fired off and saw massive robots, basically causing destruction across the exam site. Midoriya heard people screaming and saw people running away from the robot, including the glasses guy from earlier, but he paid him no attention as he focused on the problem at hand. The robot noticed Midoriya and fired off several rockets at him. He quickly sent out numerous small interception beams that destroyed the missiles, but that ended up causing a huge explosion that created a huge dust cloud as rubble from the surrounding buildings just added more dust and debris. Midoriya covered his mouth with his shirt and shielded his eyes with his hand as he tried to look around, but to no avail. He heard something being fired off and quickly pulled up a barrier as it crashed against the shield, cracking it on impact. The green-haired boy cursed as he took down the barrier, saw the dust settling. Midoriya became alarmed when he saw a girl being pinned down by debris as she struggled to break free, and what made matters worse was that the giant robot was slowly making its way towards the downed girl. He noticed that everyone else was quite a ways behind him as they did nothing to try and save the girl being pinned down, in fear of the giant robot. Midoriya looked at the robot, and then the girl before shaking his head and charged straight at the robot, dodging several laser beams that were being shot at him as his eyes began to glow as he felt the sun's rays giving him strength as he used all the power he had in him and used all of OFA in his body and jumped up, launching himself into the air. Everyone else on the ground looked stunned as they saw Midoriya facing the robot head-on. Gah! Midoriya grunted when he saw his legs wiggle in the air wildly, but he didn't care at the moment as he was at the height of his head. The mouth of the robot opened up and launched a huge laser that blasted the boy point-blank range, but it didn't finish him off as Midoriya groaned at the amount of pain he was in. If I hadn't put up that barrier at the last second, I would have been done for. Midoriya was slowly getting closer and closer to the robot as the laser didn't affect his trajectory. He gritted his teeth as he felt the power of OFA envelope his arm as he tightened it into a fist and reeled it back. He didn't even think of what he was doing, but he went into overdrive as the adrenaline pumped him up. His eyes were glowing a bright yellow as he gave the punch everything he had while he clenched his buttocks. Smash! Midoriya connected his attack with the robot, creating a huge force that knocked it back, and a huge crater formed a second later. Several explosions were seen as the robot began to fall back, eventually crashing down onto the street. The boy sighed as his adrenaline was all used up, and then he noticed his situation. His right arm was broken due to an overjump of OFA power, and his legs for the same reason. He began to panic as he now had no way to break his fall, except for his left arm, but it was also injured due to the point-blank laser. Crap! At this rate, I'm going to become a pancake. Midoriya yelled out as he subconsciously held out his slightly less broken hand out in front of him, even though he knew it was pointless, and began to make silent prayers to his mom and any higher being. He got even closer to the ground, but suddenly, he felt a jerk as his rapid descent began to slow down and he was within arm's distance of the ground. He suddenly flopped onto the ground. Searing pain began to envelope the boy as he clenched his right arm in pain as he landed on it. He grunted in pain as he saw the pinned girl with her hands together as she panted and raised a sickly thumbs up before placing them both on top of her mouth. She didn't look too good and she finally let out her stomach, hurling right in front of Midoriya, but he didn't really care as he was too busy feeling the pain he felt, but he did hear her retching, which nearly made him throw up, but he managed not to toss the salad. Darkness soon consumed his vision as he passed out due to the exhaustion and fatigue. The girl looked dead as she stopped vomiting and just laid there unconscious under the debris. People slowly began to gather around Midoriya as they looked at a distance. People were muttering about him and his power, but the glasses boy looked at the downed boy with a calculating gaze. He rushed in to help her without a second thought, but why? Could it be? He looked over the freckled boy as he started to gain a more of an understanding of the true nature of the exam. Pushing his glasses up, the boy gazed over the two currently downed people, but more on Midoriya as the girl was still queasy. The intercom rang, signaling that the 30 minutes were over, and many groans and cheers were heard across the entire exam field. People were gathered around Midoriya as they looked at the mangled state of his body. Both of his legs were twisted in direction a lot of them didn't know that it could bend that way, and his right arm all busted up. Many people cringed as they saw the damage the boy sustained, but ahead of the boy, seeing the amount of damage he did to the robot. Whistle, that kid did a number on your robot, a power loader. Snipe jabbed. The said hero could only sigh and left in order to recover the destroyed robot. Several of the judges were amazed by Midoriya's power and they started to discuss the topic. Toshinori smiled widely at the boy as he exceeded his expectations, then frowned when he saw the injuries the boy had suffered and took mental notes to address that. Very interesting group we have this year, Principal Nizu said as he sipped his tea and stared at two monitors, which had both Bakugo and Midoriya on them. A shaggy man in the back of the room stared at Midoriya's picture from one of the screens, and his bored eyes showed some interest as he studied the boy's information. This kid. Midoriya jolted up as he looked at his surroundings, deducing that he was in the infirmary, which was confirmed when he saw Recovery Girl open the curtain to his bed and looked at him before whacking him with her stick numerous times, causing the boy to groan as he tried to block the hits. After a couple minutes of that, she stopped and grabbed his hands, showing him his scars across his arm, fist, and his legs. He could tell that he did some serious damage on his body as the amount of bandages implied that. Look, Sonny, These injuries can't be constant as I can't fully heal your injuries every time. It will affect your body eventually, but for now, you're good to go. Recovery girl said as she handed him a sucker and kicked him out of the infirmary. Midoriya looked back at the door before walking out of the building and saw the wave of people walking out of the campus, and he deduced that the exam was over and started to walk out of the campus. Checking the time, he noticed that it was already past noon. He then checked his messages and saw a message from the girl he met in the morning. "Hello, it's Yaoyorozu. How was the exam?" He looked at the screen before he began to type. "It was good. It just ended right now. What are you doing?" A few seconds later, a message popped up on his screen. He stood off to the side of the gate. "That's great. I'm currently standing right beside you." Tongue sticking out, Midoriya turned, and sure enough, Yaoyorozu was standing right beside him smiling as she waved her hand and stood in front of him. He blushed and smiled at her. "What are you still doing here, Yaoyorozu?" Midoriya asked as they stood off to the side of the gates, but attracted unwanted attention as people began to look at the Yaoyorozu, more specifically, her body. Boys and men alike were eyeing her body like hungry tigers while women and girls were looking at her body with jealousy, causing the girl to squirm in displeasure and discomfort as the intensity of the looks was slowly making her nervous. Midoriya noticed this and grew weary as he saw several attempts of catcalling. He felt her grip his arm tightly as she shielded herself from them, using Midoriya as a barrier between her and them. The boy gulped nervously as he felt her pressing her body onto his arm, causing him to blush a lot, but he managed to calm his hormones and led her away from all the unwanted attention. After walking for a couple of minutes, they ended up at the local ice cream place. They both sat down at a booth, with Yaoyorozu with a triple banana split, while Midoriya ordered a simple Neapolitan in a bowl. He watched her happily scarf the treat down, while he took simple spoonfuls of ice cream and couldn't help but smile when she moaned in delight. She grabbed a napkin and cleaned her face off from the chocolate drizzle. "I would like to thank you for what you did back there and for the ice cream. I will repay you in due time." She bowed her head slightly. "Ah, no. IIT's fine. You don't need to do that." Midoriya stammered out, causing Yaoyorozu to stifle a chuckle. He joined her shortly, and they went back to enjoying their tasty cold treats. Once they were done, Midoriya paid for the two of them, after having a little argument about who should pay the bill. They walked out of the parlor, they walked together, and Midoriya talked about the exam and how he felt he did. She listened with great interest, but she frowned occasionally, which caught his attention, but didn't question it. The two of them walked back to the station, and Midoriya ended up tagging along with her as a sort of protection against lecherous men and envious women. He sat right beside her and took out his phone and started to scroll down numerous hero profiles, memorizing copious amounts of information. He turned to Yaoyorozu, but she had fallen asleep and slowly leaned her head on his shoulder. The boy's face instantly went red as he panicked from the contact, but he eventually calmed down and let her be as the train ride continued on through the setting sun. The vibrant mass of colors merged together in the sky. Midoriya smiled as he heard her tiny snores, and she slowly began to curl herself onto his arm. "We're here." Midoriya lightly shook Yaoyorozu, causing her to stir as she yawned and stretched her arms. She then looked down and let out a yelp as she saw that she was on his back. She blushed, and then she noticed that they were walking on her street. "How did you know where I lived?" she asked as Midoriya chuckled and continued to walk. "Well, I heard you say your address in your sleep, so, sorry." He nervously chuckled and rubbed the back of his neck. She looked at him before laughing and wrapped her arms around his neck for grip. She pointed to a house. "That's my house, Midoriya." He looked at the house and nearly dropped her. His eyes wandered around her house, seeing the massive estate with the large amount of yard and decorations. It looked like some sort of palace in a way, extremely grandiose. "That's your house." Midoriya walked up to the gate, and she nodded, hopping off his back. She went up to the gate and punched in a code. The gates opened and she entered, turning around to face Midoriya. "I had a wonderful time today, Midoriya. Hope we can do this again. Good night." She waved and dashed up to her porch and entered her house. The boy watched her as she left his sight and smiled before turning around and walked back towards the station. The memories of today lingered in his mind as he looked up the clear night sky. He whistled into the night and made his way back home. A couple of days later after the exam, Midoriya looked down at the envelope on his desk with the seal of UA on it. He stared at it for a couple of minutes before gripping the sides and ripped the envelope open, and a small metal device fell out, clattering onto the desk. "What is this?" he questioned as he pressed the red button at the base of it. A holographic screen popped up, startling Midoriya as it began to play, and it started with All Might appearing in a business suit. The cinnamon bun smiled widely as he saw his mentor on the screen. "All Might, I am here, as a hologram. Greetings, young Midoriya. Hope your day was plus ultra." Midoriya could feel the emotion from the screen as he then looked confused at the screen. "But wait, this is from UA. Why wait? Don't tell me why." The boy didn't finish his sentence, as the number one hero came back on screen and nearly gave Midoriya a heart attack. "Now, I'm pretty sure you have figured it out by now, yes. I will now be a teacher at UA. Now, I will be a figure in your quest to become the number one hero. Pretty neat, huh?" All Might began to laugh loudly as a hand tried to get his attention from the side of the screen, but the hero wasn't paying much attention to the hand. Midoriya sighed as he couldn't help but smile at his mentor's antics. He then saw the hand finally getting All Might's attention. "Huh, you said I have 5 minutes left? I need to talk to the boy though. What? I have to do over 100 of these? Well, better get this done. Anyways, I am here to tell you your exam scores. As you already know, you scored a perfect score on the written exam. Very studious, my boy. As for the practical exam, please, take a look at the score." The camera moved to show a screen that appeared behind All Might, and it showed a scoreboard with all of the different scores on the panel. It scrolled up until it got to the top 10 people of the exam, and Midoriya smiled as he saw his score. All Might once again appeared on screen as he had a big smile on his face. "As you saw, you had 60 combat/villain points, making you the second highest in that regard, under young Bakugo. But there was another element to this test rather than just destroying robots is rescue points. Of course, we weren't going to ignore heroic acts, and you, young Midoriya, displayed that throughout the exam. For that, you get 75 rescue points. And that girl you saved from the debris, she is awarded 45 rescue points as she helped you to safety. With that, you have scored the highest on this exam, making you one of the only to ever reach above the 100-point mark on the exam. Good job. I am proud of you. And remember to give it your plus ultra." Midoriya started to tear up in happiness as passed the exam as the top person in the exam. He smiled happily at the screen. "I did it," he said as he celebrated his achievement. Inko silently looking at her son as she smiled and soon after left her son to his celebrating, her smile never leaving her face. "Come, young Midoriya, this is your Hero Academia." All Might's wide grin and his outstretched arm made Midoriya smile as he looked down at his fist and clenched it as he looked up at his idol. He nodded as the hologram shut off, and he was left in silence in his room as there was a faint beeping noise. He looked around in confusion as the beeping steadily increased as he started to scramble, trying to find the source of it, until he finally landed his gaze at the hologram. Self-destruct sequence activated. OSH. A blast was heard from the kitchen, causing Inko to rush up the stairs to her son's room. Once she got there, she frantically opened the door. "Son, are you okay?" she frantically said as she saw the state of his room. It looked like a bomb had gone off in his room. Things were blown out of their place. She looked around until she saw her son currently getting up from the floor. Sulfur sod, or whatever it was, covered Midoriya from head to toe. Inko scrambled over to her son in worry as he coughed out smoke. "Are you okay, Izuku? Do I need to call an ambulance?" Inko yelled, looking all over her son. Midoriya sheepishly smiled and assured his mom that he was all good. It took him 20 minutes to finally calm her down, and even after that, she almost called the ER, which he had to stop her from doing so. After that fiasco, he checked his phone, and it appeared he had a text from Tashinori. "Meet me at Takoba at 9 p.m. Okay. Midoriya ate dinner and made his way over to his training ground and saw the tall, lanky man as usual. The boy smiled and made his way over to him and joined him as they watched the rising moon from the horizon. The calming effect instantly came to Midoriya as the tides were being attracted to by him. The shallow end rose in water levels as Midoriya's quirk affected them, but not to any dangerous levels. "Good job, kid. You exceeded my expectations once again. Your hero life will begin tomorrow, and your uniform should have came after your acceptance envelope. You did receive the uniform, yes? Tashinori looked at the boy, who nodded, and they went back to gazing at the moon, now surrounded by stars as they enveloped the dark sky. They stayed like that until they parted ways, the thought of Yue on their minds as they were ready to tackle any challenge that would come their way. The next day, Midoriya looked in amazement at the size of the door to his class, Class 1A of the hero course. He gulped as he fidgeted with his tie to his uniform, and sweat began to roll down on his back. He exhaled and looked at the door with confidence, and he pushed the door open, revealing that several students were already in the classroom, including Bakugo and the glasses guy from the exam. And why the hell should I listen to your damn orders? Midoriya heard Bakugo say at the boy, who just simply fixed his glasses and bowed to the blonde hothead. My name is Tinya Ida. I'm from Somei Private School. Pleased to meet you, the boy said. Bakugo clicked his tongue in annoyance and glared at the boy, a predatory grin on his face. Ah, fucking hotshot elitist smartass, huh? I'll enjoy blowing your ass up, fucking nerd. Ida recoiled in shock at his vulgar language. You want to become a hero. After that, Ida then turned to Midoriya and bowed. He started his introduction once more, but the green-haired boy stopped him from doing so. I must apologize for my ignorance of the true purpose of the exam. You figured it out? I have much to learn from you. Ida bowed to Midoriya once more, causing the boy to blush in embarrassment. He felt eyes on him as people were looking at him, until a girl jumped into his vision, pink skin and black eyes that made her look almost like an alien. She bounced in front of Midoriya happily. You're the guy that got a perfect score on the written exam, and first on the practical exam. Wow, you must be very strong. Anyways, my name is Mina Ashido. Pleased to meet you, Midoriya. She had a huge grin on her face, which caused Midoriya to have a smile threaten his lips as her infectious personality was too much. He chuckled as he felt a tap on his shoulder. He turned and saw the brunette girl that he had saved back at the exam, and vice versa. She had a bubbly smile on her face as she smiled at him. Wow, we're in the same class. That's very cool, and I wanted to thank you for saving me at the exam. She started to think, and she gave him a sheepishly smile. My name is Midoriya. Pleased to meet you. He held out his hand to the girl, who gingerly grabbed it and shook it. I'm Uraraka. Nice to meet you, Midoriya. Likewise. Like Ashido, Uraraka had a bright personality and an infectious one at that. They seemed always happy, well, at least to him for the time that he had met the two. People began to trickle, and finally, they managed to cap it out at 20, for now. Midoriya saw Yaoyorozu and attempted to wave at her to get her attention, but she apparently didn't see him and began to converse with some of the other students, causing him to sigh in defeat before hearing the door to the room open up, and a man that looked extremely dead inside and outside with a white scarf. He was dragging along a sleeping bag with him as he made his way to the desk up front. Everyone just looked at him as he looked like he was lost in thought. This isn't a time to be mingling with each other. Here, put these on and meet me at the practice field. He placed a bunch of exercise uniforms and left the room. Everyone looked at each other, except for Ida, who grabbed a uniform that had his name on it and left the room to go change into it. Midoriya went up next and found the one labeled with his name on it and quickly went to the changing room to change into it, surprised that it was a perfect fit for him. He then made his way to the practice field, where he saw Ida and the rough-looking man, which he assumed that he was the teacher of the class, and waited for the rest of his classmates, slowly coming one by one. He glanced at the man as he just stared at the entrance, as he had an extremely bored look on his face. Once everyone arrived, the man sighed and took out a timer and stopped it. You guys were 5 minutes 47 seconds late. There is no late time in the hero course, he said in a rough tone, causing several people to flinch involuntarily. He then led them to an open field and stood in front of them. My name is Aizawa, and I'll be your homeroom teacher. Anyways, Midoriya, come forth. Aizawa looked dead center at Midoriya, who nervously came forward. Bakugo was glaring at him as he made his way over to Aizawa. You got the top score in the entrance exam, but with that half-assed usage of your quirk, you won't become a hero. Anyways, what was your shot put distance without your quirk? Midoriya was kind of upset that he was getting belittled, but he decided that lashing out would get him sent onto the first train of expulsion. 43 meters, he said, and then looked at Aizawa, who had a shot-put ball in his hand, and walked over to the boy and placed it in his hands. Midoriya looked at the ball with shock. It was so light for him, probably because his training with All Might boosted his physical prowess, or maybe because he was being strengthened by the sun. Anyways, Aizawa motioned him to go to the circle and stand in it. This time, use your quirk and don't hold back, or else. He left the threat hang, causing Midoriya to get shivers down his spine, but he sighed and entered the circle with the ball in his hands. He powered OFA through his arm at max power and got ready to throw it. He threw it with everything he had and launched the ball. He stared in horror as it only made it to the 20-meter mark, causing several of his classmates to snicker at the poor score. Bakugo was laughing hysterically. Midoriya was looking at his hand with horror as he felt really shaken up from that. Don't worry, I just erased your quirk, Midoriya. You were about to break your arm again, just like the exam. A hero that self-inflicts wounds is a liability in the future. Think hard on what you're about to do next. People looked on with confusion about the erasing part, but Midoriya looked shocked at Aizawa. Wait, you're the erasure hero, Eraserhead. The hero that can erase quirks, and is said to be super underground and doesn't like the public all too well. Is that really you? Midoriya said with an excited look on his face. Aizawa just looked at him before grunting. Just threw the ball again, he said as Midoriya once again got into the circle and watched his every move. The boy was in deep turmoil as he didn't know what to do until he felt calm all of a sudden and looked at the sun, which was glowing brighter than normal. He smiled as he looked forward and let the sun's energy take him as it flowed throughout his body. Then he powered up OFA through his arm and once again got ready to throw it. He then put everything he had into the throw, and at the last second, he concentrated all of his energy into a single point and released the ball. Everyone looked stunned as they saw the trail it left as it disappeared out of anyone's vision. Midoriya turned to Aizawa. His arm was numb and some wounds appeared all over it, but it wasn't as bad as in the exam. How was that, Mr. Aizawa? Midoriya said as he clenched his arm in pain, but he was still able to move. This kid. Aizawa had a grin on his face as he looked at the green-haired boy. Then he turned to the rest of the class. All right, everyone else. There are multiple tests here. Do them, and the person with the lowest score will be expelled. Got it? He said in a serious tone, causing several people to become worried. Aizawa then turned to Midoriya and held out a screen, which had a number on it. 5,102 kilometers. Very well done. Go get yourself checked up. You're exempted from the tests, he said and walked off. Midoriya saw Yaoyorozu walk up to their teacher. Mr. Aizawa, may I please escort Midoriya to the infirmary? She asked, and he nodded before walking off. She then turned to him and smiled, catching up to him, and made their way to the infirmary. Midoriya did notice the aura that Bakugo was releasing as he was looking at him with a death glare and gritted teeth. The two of them walked in silence as they left the practice field. Midoriya stopped Yaoyorozu and asked her to wait for a bit, which she nodded. He then concentrated on his arm, and a beam of sunlight hit his arm, restoring it to its original state. She ran up to him in concern as he fell to his knees and was sweating really hard. Are you okay? She said as she materialized a water bottle and handed it over to him, which he gladly took and finished the entire bottle a couple of seconds later. He sighed in contempt and thanked her for it. After she helped him up, they continued on towards the infirmary on behalf of Yaoyorozu's concern for his health. Midoriya declined at first, but she glared at him, which almost made him wet his pants, and agreed to do so. Is that what happens to your arm when you use your quirk? She asked, looking quite worried at him, and got pretty close to him, which caused him to blush and created some distance from her. He scratched his cheek and chuckled nervously before replacing it with a serious look, which caught her attention and turned towards him. What you saw there, yeah? That's what happens when I use too much power. I break the part one used too much power with. It shows my lack of control over that power, but I will eventually succeed in controlling power to become the greatest hero of all time. Yaoyorozu was stunned at his words, but soon smiled as she heard his conviction and was moved by his words. Well, I guess I'll tag along on your adventure to become the best of the best. As of right now, you're pretty reckless with that power, so I'll have to step in to set you right, okay? She said as she had a sly smile on her face. He laughed and nodded as they arrived at the infirmary. Needlessly to say, Recovery Girl didn't like the visit and whacked Midoriya with her stick, startling Yaoyorozu as she tried and stopped the hero from beating him up anymore. After she had stopped, she checked his arm and did numerous other assessments before telling him that he was fine for now, but the ligaments in his arm were wearing down from the 2 injuries, so she advised to let the arm heal for at least a couple of days. When they exited the building, it was already past noon, and school was over. The setting sun colored the sky with red, yellow, and hints of violet. The both of them exited the building and saw that a couple of people were waiting for them at the gate. Midoriya smiled as Uraraka waved at them. Ida fixed his glasses, and they met halfway. "Good to see you in good health, Midoriya," Ida said. Midoriya smiled and thanked him before looking past them and seeing a couple of other people in his class. They all walked up to Midoriya, starting with the spiky redhead. He held out his hand for Midoriya. "Name's Kirishima. You showed some mighty power during the throw there. It got me pretty pumped up. Sadly that you didn't do the other tests. Wished I could have seen more of that power, Midoriya." Midoriya looked at him before smiling and accepted his hand, shaking it firmly. The both of them smiled at each other, but then the girl with the pink skin broke the handshake and grabbed both of Midoriya's hands. "Hiya, Mina Ishido. You can call me Mina, Deku. I know I introduced myself in class, but I wanted it to be more formal. Pleased to meet you," she exclaimed with happiness. Midoriya smiled at her antics, but frowned a little when he heard his nickname, which didn't go unnoticed by Yaoyorozu and Ida as they looked at him with some curiosity, but also worry. Midoriya forced a smile out for Ishido's sake and chuckled genuinely when her and Kirishima were arguing over something. He then turned towards the blonde with a black lightning bolt in his hair and a girl with short purple hair with the earjacks hanging from her earlobes. "Yo, name's Kaminari, and this is Jiro. It's pretty cool to meet you," Kaminari said and gave him a thumbs up while Jiro just nodded at him. He smiled at the both of them and thought that he was in a class with a bunch of cool people. Plus, they're going to be in the same class for the next 3 years, so building the friendships and bonds will be a top priority to Midoriya. He then turned to Ida and Uraraka and looked at them in confusion. "Wait, why are you guys here for?" he asked. Uraraka smiled as she clasped her hands together. "We were waiting for you, so we could go eat dinner together," she said happily, and Kirishima and Ishido nodded. Midoriya heard Ida clear his throat and looked at him. Uraraka here proposed that we all get to know each other better, as we will be in the same class all 3 years. So, we decided on the idea of having dinner together as the best option. We asked everyone if they wanted to come, but most of them declined rather politely, except for Bakugo, who stomped off angrily. "Such crude behavior," Ida said. Midoriya could only sigh at Bakugo's attitude, but smiled at the thought of a little get-together. "All right, I'm in. Yaoyorozu, what about you?" He turned to her, but she seemed a bit off. He raised an eyebrow and placed his hand on her shoulder, which startled her, and that caused her defense instincts to kick in. She flipped Midoriya onto the ground with a loud thud, his face comically confused as he felt a blade pressed against his neck, which caused him to go into full panic mode. Everybody else looked on with confusion, except for Jiro, who whistled at Yaoyorozu's flip, and Ida, who was chopping the air as he told the spiky-haired girl that judo flipping people wasn't allowed in a school environment. Yaoyorozu finally came back to reality and saw that she currently had Midoriya pinned to the ground with a blade to his neck. The boy, on the other hand, had swirls his eyes as he just laid there, confused and scared for his life. She then looked at everyone else and blushed before hopping off of the boy and quickly apologized to him before bowing. Midoriya slowly go up and waved it off like it was nothing, which inspired Ida, for some reason. "Sorry about that, Midoriya. Anyways, yes. I think getting to know each other better is a great way to start off the school year. Shame the others couldn't make or just didn't want to come. Hopefully they will next time," she said. Everyone smiled as they made their way out of campus grounds and started to look for a place to eat dinner while getting to know each other better. The girls ended up huddling with each other while the guys just stuck together as they saw the girls do just that. This applied to the place that they found to eat, which was a local diner that was pretty famous for their delicious food. It was girls in one table while the guys had the table across from them. Once they ordered what they wanted, they had small conversations within their tables. Kirishima and Kaminari were discussing quirks and the apprehension test, or that's what they said at least. Midoriya and Ida were discussing several things, especially how they came to be at UA. Over at the girls' table, Yaoyorozu and Jiro were hitting it off while Ishido and Uraraka were discussing their quirks to each other. They waited for a good 15 minutes, and their food looked absolutely delicious. "Oh man, this looks amazing," Kaminari said as he examined his food. Kirishima agreed as he eyed his food with great hunger. The girls were marveling their food, and they all said their thanks and greetings before they all took a bite out of their food. Needlessly to say, the reputation of the diner was 100% fact. Midoriya enjoyed his food while chuckling at Kaminari and Kirishima as they scarfed down their food, while Ito was telling them not to eat like that, but they kept on going. The girls chuckled at the boys' table as they enjoyed their food more manner-like. They were all discussing Yaoyorozu's quirk, asking a ton of questions about it, while she was trying to answer all of them, but was overwhelmed by them. Overall, it was a great time as Midoriya learned more about everyone that had enjoyed the little bonding experience. "You know, we should do this again," Kaminari said as they exited the diner, paying for their food and even leaving an extra tip. They all felt rather satisfied with the food, and they all had a great time there. Everyone else agreed as they continued to walk together, while the moon was now rising to take its place in the sky. Midoriya smiled as the calming rays of the moon made him want to go to the beach and just swim for all eternity. He then had an idea pop into his mind. "How about we all exchange our contact information and make a group chat for the class? We can get everyone else's tomorrow. How does that sound to you guys?" Midoriya asked. "I think that's a grand idea, Midoriya," Ida said, and they all took out their phones and gave each other their contact information before Midoriya made the group chat and smiled at everyone. They stopped at an intersection and said their goodbyes as they left, leaving just Midoriya and Yaoyorozu to walk home together, which was rather convenient as she felt uncomfortable at night and had asked him if he could escort her home during the dinner get-together as a class. He accepted and walked towards her house, which was now pretty easy to go to, as he remembered the directions, and the fact that it was a big mansion made it pretty easy for him. They continued to walk in silence as the moon was soothing Midoriya's mind, and he felt like his connection with it was growing ever stronger, but still not strong enough for him. But he pushed the though back into his mind as he continued to escort her back to her house, making sure to make idle chat with her every so often. Once they made it over to her house, she waved at him before closing the gate to her house, and she left behind a smiling Midoriya as he left the area with a smile of his own. "Mom, I'm home," he shouted once he got back from the little activity that they did. He noticed that his mom wasn't in the living room, and then he checked the time, which was almost midnight. He looked at the clock in bewilderment. He then quickly got out of his uniform and quickly dressed himself so that he could sleep to rebuild his energy. The next day, Midoriya was the first person in the classroom, so he ended up taking a nap at his desk. He woke up due to Ito waking him up and scolded him for sleeping in the classroom. The day felt pretty normal as some of the pro heroes were working with them on different subjects, like English and science. For Midnight's class, which was history over hero art, which was mostly her flirting with the class and several of the guys swooning over her, while the girls were looking at the pro hero with a deadpan look. Midoriya was too busy writing down information that would help him in the long run in his notebook, which contains everything about a pro hero, starting with All Might, of course, and filled out more information on Midnight. After having several more classes, it was now the last period of the day before the second day was over. They were all currently sitting in class, talking amongst each other as they waited for what they were doing tomorrow. "Man, that math class sure was pretty challenging, am I right?" Kaminari said as he stood in front of Kirishima's desk as they talked about their second experience. "Dude, the English class, now that was the hardest yet," he said, which his friend nodded to as they waited for their next thing that they were going to be doing for the rest of the day. All of a sudden, the door to the room opened suddenly, and a familiar voice boomed throughout the room. "I am coming." Through the door, like a normal person, All Might said as he revealed himself and his costume, which got everyone's attention. "Wow, it's All Might. That must be the costume from his golden ages. Seriously, All Might's one of our teacher, pretty cool." Chattering could be heard as everyone was excited for the first lesson with the greatest her of all. His ever-wide smile grew as he saw the excitement on everyone's faces and cleared his throat. "Yes, I will be the foundational hero studies teacher, and I am here to teach you what it is to be a hero. Before that, I would like to start the day with a little something special." Will everyone put on their hero costume and meet me at the simulation area at Ground B? I will see you there, the hero said as he left the classroom, leaving a stunned class behind. A couple of seconds later, they all managed to grab their hero costumes and made their way to the changing room. Midoriya was thinking hard on the subject as he put on his costume. He sighed before looking at himself in the mirror and splashed his face with water. He dried himself and nodded firmly before making his way towards the designated area, ready for what lies ahead of him. Chapter 4. Deep in Battle. Midoriya was the last one to enter the training ground, as everyone else was already there in their hero costume. He sighed as he fixed his golden fingerless gloves and walked into the sunlight as his eyes began to turn gold and his hero costume shimmered to life. On his head, a small golden manly tiara appeared on his head with several suns on it, with small little red gems. He donned a golden white scarf with golden linings on the sides of it, and was wearing a gold long-sleeved vest that stopped to his midsection in the front and in the back traveled down, making it look like a cloak with a white tank top underneath it. In the center of the shirt was a moving celestial sun as it radiated brightly. Moving on, he had a white rope holding his golden cargo pants and a pair of white and gold sneakers. His hair had a golden hue to it as he sighed in content and stretched his arms out, noticing the stares his classmates were giving him. What? Midoriya said, looking confused. All of a sudden, many people swarmed him and started to introduce themselves. After a couple of minutes of introductions, Midoriya managed to get everyone's names and began to connect them with their faces, as he was basically going to be a family with them for 3 years. He smiled as he joined everyone as All Might appeared from inside of the building and motioned for everyone to follow him to the area between the building and the monitor room, all while having a big grin on his face. Welcome. I've been expecting you. Anyways, instead of doing some old boring schoolwork, we're going to be doing a little simulation. 2 teams of 2 will face each other inside this little training building as a simulation between heroes and villains. Teams will be sorted randomly, so please, turn your attention to the monitor. A screen appeared, and it began to cycle between names as it showed all of the teams and 2 slots for each one. It continued for some time until the slots began to slow down as it was winding down. Sudden. Why? It stopped and Midoriya looked at the screen before finding his name and then saw his teammate. Well, I guess we're teammates, Midori. He turned and saw no one, but noticed the floating gloves. He sighed as he felt pretty bad for not noticing her right away, but he smiled as both of them were together. Yeah, it's pretty cool, Hagakure. The invisible chuckled as she stood beside Midoriya as they looked at all the teams until his eyes landed on a couple of teams that interested him. Ida and Uraraka, Kaminari and Kirishima, Jiro and Todoroki, and the final group, Yaoyorozu and Bakugo. Midoriya gritted his teeth as in terms of power between the two, his team was at a disadvantage as Hagakure's quirk made her permanently invisible. However, she would be amazing at a stealth approach to this simulation, but he didn't know what it was going to simulate. A hostage situation? Or some sort of heist operation? Or is it? Midoriya was going into one of his little calculating triads, but was brought out of it by Hagakure as she pointed to All Might as he was explaining the rules of the thing. 15-minute time limit. This will simulate a bomb threat, so the villains will enter first. Victory conditions for the heroes is simply touching the bomb. Villains will have 10 minutes to prepare for it. As for the teams, once again, look at the monitor. Everyone looked at the monitor before it chose each team's opponent, which caused Midoriya to bite his thumb. His opposition was the one team he didn't want to face. Bakugo was grinning his teeth as he turned towards the green-haired boy and fired off a couple of explosions. First match. Heroes Hagakure and Midoriya versus villains Yaoyorozu and Bakugo. Villains, you may proceed inside the building. Heroes wait here. Everyone else, please follow me into the monitor room. With that, everyone went their ways as Midoriya watched Yaoyorozu and Bakugo enter the building and sighed as he sat down. Hagakure shortly after followed him as he took out his notebook and began to think about their strategy. She was looking over his notes as he wrote down numerous things that could impact the match. What's wrong, Midori? Shouldn't it just be touch the thing and win? It sounds like we have the advantage as we just touch it, right? Hagakure as she looked at Midoriya. He shook his head as he looked at the building and counted 10 stories. He then turned back to her. In that sense, yes. Our victory conditions is a lot easier than the villains. However, in reality, we are at a disadvantage in this match. Do you know why, Hagakure? He asked his partner. She shook her head and lightly punched the side of her head, or that's what it looked like. He just smiled, and his demeanor changed all of a sudden. The major disadvantage is that we don't know where the bomb is at, but the villains do. So we'll be wasting our time if we check all the floors. Plus, the time given to the villains lets them set up, which is bad since this is territory we don't know. Traps, things like that could happen. The other disadvantage is that our opponents have an advantage over us in combat. No offense, Hagakure. He looked at her. She waved him off and gave him a thumbs up, and they continued to strategize their approach to the building. Well, what about Bakugo? He's really strong. His power he displayed during the apprehension test was scary. Hagakure looked at Midoriya and saw that the timer for them to begin was 5 minutes. Midoriya shook his head as he closed his notebook and looked at her. Their team is strong. However, Bakugo will most likely go off alone in order to find me. Yaoyorozu will be protecting the bomb as her quirk is the perfect defense for it. Don't worry, I'll deal with Bakugo while you try to disarm the bomb, he said as he got ready and began to stretch his body out. Hagakure joined him as the time ran down as it was almost time to go. All right, heroes, you may proceed. Remember, 15 minutes. All Might said. They both nodded and began to enter the building, but Midoriya quickly grabbed Hagakure's hand and pulled her back from the entrance. She looked at him with confusion and he pointed to the floor. She didn't see anything right away, but then she caught a glimpse of some glare as it blinded her temporarily. Careful, that was wire. Some sort of trap for us. We're going to have to find another way to enter the building. But first, he concentrated his energy and his hand began to glow until he released it, and a little ball of light appeared in his hand before flying off into the building. He closed his eyes before opening them. His eyes changed shape from his normal eyes to a more sharpened and coarse look. She looked at him in worry as he wasn't moving for a bit, but then she saw the orb come back and Midoriya absorbed it back into his body. He breathed in and out before looking at her. The bomb is at the 8th floor of the building. We'll go up to the top floor and we'll work our way from there. Is that okay with you? He asked her, and she nodded. He knelt down and waited. She was confused until she finally figured it out and blushed as she hopped onto his back. He gulped as he felt her press herself onto his back, but he shook his thoughts away and powered OFA through his legs. Using the building closest to the main building, he managed to get to the top of the building and sat her down. Are you okay? He asked her as he dusted off dirt that he got on his costume. Yeah, anyways, let's go, she said, and they both entered the building via the top floor and made their way to the 8th floor. Midoriya peeked past a corner and motioned Hagakure to come closer. Hey, from here, make your way down to the 8th floor, but don't touch the bomb at the center. That's a decoy and a trap, so watch out for that. The real one is behind a tarp at the back of the corner, which it looks like there is nothing there. Remember, don't set off any traps. We don't know the extent of Yaoyorozu's quirk. Okay, I'm going to distract Bakugo on the 5th floor. Make sure he doesn't pincer you. Be safe, Hagakure, and here. He tossed her something, and she caught it. She examined the thing that he gave her, which was a medallion with a sun on it. She didn't question it as she nodded and headed towards the bomb. Midoriya sighed as he jumped out of the window, powering OFA through his legs as to cushion his fall, and landed on ground level before jumping once again, this time to the 4th floor, and saw Bakugo facing away from him. The momentum of the jump helped Midoriya as he crashed right into the blonde, sending him flying into the wall across the hallway, shaking the very foundation of the building. Dust from the ceiling fell down as Midoriya grunted as that stunt he pulled injured his left foot, but he just healed it by sticking his foot out where he crashed into and sighed as his foot slowly healed. Rubble from the Bakugo's crash area moved as an explosion boomed through the hallway. Damn you, DKU. I am going to rip your fucking head off. Bakugo got up and charged straight at Midoriya, his eyes red with bloodlust as he fired off more explosions at Midoriya, but the boy dodged and punched the blonde's side and sent a solar-infused roundhouse to the abdomen. The blonde grunted and managed to grab Midoriya's arm and fired off an explosion to the arm and threw him to the wall. Midoriya recovered and dashed straight towards the unsuspecting Bakugo and elbowed him and summoned Dazzling Shield in order to block a massive explosion that Bakugo sent out. Growling could be heard as he launched multiple explosions as he tried to maneuver behind Midoriya, But the mirror launched up and made contact with Bakugo and crashed him into the ceiling. Midoriya gripped his arm and clenched his teeth and tried to heal it, but was sent back by an even bigger explosion. Midoriya crashed into a pillar and coughed out in pain as the blast was powerful, like the intent to kill. He gritted his teeth and wiped some blood from his lips as he glared at Bakugo, who was snarling at him as they stared each other down. Midoriya grunted as dazzling mirror was floating at his side and was glowing slightly. He then looked at it and willed it to go outside in order to charge. In the meantime, he got into a fighting stance as his fight with Bakugo was just beginning. I hope Hagicure's okay. This fight will be very intense, so I need to keep that in mind just in case if I need to save her or Yaoyorozu. I need to trust in her and focus on fighting Kaken. Midoriya thought as he gazed at Bakugo, who was firing off more mini explosions as his sweat was picking up. The hell? How are you doing this? You're supposed to be quirkless, you bastard. Bakugo shouted as he charged at Midoriya and fired off another explosion. But his reckless attack style allowed Midoriya to quickly dodge out of the way and launched several rays of light straight at Bakugo and used that time to get in close and send a Detroit smash at him while the rays hit him. But Bakugo grinned and blasted Midoriya point-blank range. Smoke enveloped that area, and Midoriya was shot out of that cloud, as he was encased in a lunar barrier. Once he had some distance from Bakugo, he dropped the barrier and started to breathe heavily. Wow, this battle is intense, Kirishima said. Several nods agreed with him as they watched the battle unfold from the monitor room. Uraraka and Ida were growing worried as the battle between the two intensified as they once again went at it with each other. People were watching the battle with either awe or fear, or both as they saw the power they were packing, except for Todoroki as he watched Midoriya with a passive look. Jiro watched the battle and winced when Midoriya got punched in the gut and was blasted away. She then turned towards the monitor that had Hagakure and Yaoyorozu little skirmish going on as Hagakure was hiding from Yaoyorozu while on the 8th floor with the bomb in sight. Hagakure had abandoned her gloves as she went into full stealth mode as she tried to find a path to get past Yaoyorozu as the ponytailed girl was guarding the bomb, a staff in her hands and many traps around the bomb as added protection. All of a sudden, the building began to shake, forcing both girls to cling onto something as the battle down below grew more and more intense. There were several boxes that had toppled next to the bomb, so Hagakure used those boxes as a safe spot. Dai DKU. Bakugo's voice could be heard followed by several explosions and shaking as the building was starting to become unstable due to the fight between childhood friends. Hagakure started to get worried, so she started to look for ways she could, and then she noticed the worried look that Yaoyorozu had as she stared at the door, not bothering to check the area until she heard something fall down behind her and turned around and created a paint can. She flung it at the area, and she heard a groan as an outline of a girl appeared. Hagakure, I'm sorry, but you won't be getting past me, Yaoyorozu said as she twirled her staff and was ready to engage should she need to. Hagakure stepped back and fell to her knees as the whole building began to shake once more, but now cracks were beginning to form on the floor as they heard several things collapsing. The invisible girl grabbed the medallion that Midoriya gave her and she instinctively held it up. It began to glow brightly, forcing Yaoyorozu to turn away, giving Hagakure time to touch the bomb, but her leg ended up getting caught in rope as it tightened and held her there. She struggled to break free as the medallion began to lose brightness. All Might watched the battle while gripping the mic as he saw the fight between the two grow more intense as they were now on the 6th floor of the building G. Seeing Midoriya connect another Detroit smash and sent the blonde crashing into the wall. His face had blood dripping down his forehead, and his right arm was all torn as he had overused OFA in that arm, and several rips were in his costume. The dazzling mirror that was collecting sunlight dropped to the ground before it became dull, losing the shine it had. Cracks were forming among the outside walls as the clash between former friends intensified. The rest of the class looked on with worry as the intense battle was wearing down the structure of the building. What power! It's almost scary, Ojiro said as he looked at the monitor with the two girls of each team as they were being forced to the ground as the unstable building was starting to sway. Bakugo's power is almost bloodthirsty, but definitely animalistic for sure. Shoji said as another shockwave was felt even in the monitor room as the building's sturdiness was starting to disappear. Everyone was starting to look worried as the fight with Midoriya and Bakugo was getting even more intense than before, but All Might couldn't stop the battle as all he could do was watch, disregarding several of the students' requests to shut it down. Midoriya grunted as his dodges were getting sloppy as an explosive punch nicked his stomach. He looked around the area that they were in, and then at the floor that they had made a hole in when they were going at it. He gritted his teeth as he had twisted his right ankle, and he couldn't heal it without running low on energy, and with Bakugo on his rampage, the end result is something that he didn't want to think of. I have to end this, or else this will get very dangerous. Damn it, the recoil of Kaken's quirk should be active already. He's still going on just so he can beat me up. Midoriya thought as he blocked a punch with his elbow that was reinforced with lunar energy, as he then blocked an explosion and skidded away from Bakugo. He panted as he sent multiple rays of light that nicked Bakugo's cheek and blasted a hole in the all behind the blonde. The building once again shook as the building's support was nearly at its edge. Midoriya could feel the building's collapse at any moment. Hagakure, can you hear me? Hagakure heard a voice from the medallion and held it up to her ear. Midoriya, is that you? She asked as she dodged some falling rubble and hid behind a pillar, while Yaoyorozu looking at the ceiling with worry as she started to fidget and started to unconsciously make a bunch of wooden dolls as she was beating in her head what to do. Yeah, anyways, I want you and Yaoyorozu to leave the building, as in right now, Midoriya said as he dodged another explosion that blasted another hole in the wall. Midoriya looked back at the damage and then rushed at Bakugo and delivered a swift kick to the side and created a fist made up of solar energy, uppercutting Bakugo to the ceiling. He placed his hand to his ear and contacted Hagakure. Are you guys out of here yet? Midoriya said as he felt the building start to collapse. Midori, where do we go? The emergency exit is blocked. He heard Hagakure say, and he cursed as he saw Bakugo landing on the ground and had an even angrier expression than before as he started to fire off explosions left and right. Damn it. Yao, can you get yourselves down from the windows? Like, can you make a parachute or something that can break you fall? He didn't know if she was with Hagakure, but he had a feeling she was, and it was confirmed when he heard her voice. I can make a parachute, but what about you? Better yet, how do you know I was with Hagakure? Well, I'm pretty sure once the building was starting to break down, you'd be worried about the structure more than Hagakure touching the bomb. Anyways, get yourselves out of the building, he said as he heard even more intense growling as he could literally see steam coming off of Bakugo's body. Damn DKU, I'll fucking rip your head off. Bakugo yelled as he charged recklessly at Midoriya and released another big explosion that shook the building, and then part of the floor collapsed as the whole building was beginning to shake, knocking the both of them off balance as rumbling was heard. Midoriya felt the building slowly collapsing as he then looked at Bakugo, who didn't even care if the building's condition as he rushed Midoriya and released an explosion at point-blank range, sending Midoriya flying into a wall. This made Midoriya angry as he dashed at Bakugo at blinding speeds and launched a Detroit smash at his abdomen, and then sent a wave of light that caught the blonde mid-air and crashed him into a wall. He then charged to where Bakugo was at and grabbed him, breaking through the wall and into the next room over. He let go of Bakugo and watched as the blonde skidded to a halt and glared at Midoriya as the dust was beginning to fall from the ceiling and the building was slowly tilting. Fucking die. Bakugo charged at Midoriya, ignoring the pain in his arms. Midoriya simply powered the last amount of solar energy he had and followed suit, both of them putting everything they had into the attack. The two of them launched their attacks, and a huge explosion was heard as the building was obliterated by the combination of the attacks. Everyone looked in shock as they saw the explosion from the monitor, and both the two girls from each team was hiding behind a blast-resistant shield, but the force of the blast was pushing them back as Yaoyorozu planted the shield down, allowing them to breathe as the explosion died down. After that, everyone rushed out of the monitor room and checked on the two girls as they appeared behind the shield unscathed. Everyone smiled as they saw that they were okay, but then turned their attention towards the now destroyed building, and even some of the other buildings were damaged in the process. Holy crap, Kirishima said as they all made their way to the rubble of the building. Ida grabbed a piece of metal that was from the bomb and showed it to the rest of the class. All Might grew worried as they began to look for the two boys, Jiro plugging her earphones anywhere she could to see if she can find them, while everyone else was moving the rubble to see if they were under there. Yaoyorozu was growing increasingly worried as she also searched for her friend. "Damn it, where are they?" Kaminari said as he threw several pieces of rubble out of the way as he was growing frustrated much like the rest of the class. Uraraka was moving the larger pieces of rubble as she was frantically searching for Midoriya. She was about to continue when she felt her recoil and nearly threw up, but Ishido and Tsuyu saw her condition and helped her sit down. All Might was moving objects left and right as he tried to search for the two students, and was growing frustrated as he ended up crushing some rubble that was in his hands. After a couple minutes of searching and nothing showing up, people were starting to lose hope, the first one being Mineta. "Why are we even searching? They're probably dead from the massive explosion," the two mad. That ended up with over half of the class giving him a death glare, causing him to squeak and shut up for the duration. While people were slowly losing hope, people like Ida, Kirishima, Yaoyorozu, and Kaminari continued to look for the two along with All Might and Jiro. Hagakure was watching from a distance as she noticed a mirror on the floor and walked over to it. She grabbed it and inspected it. It suddenly glowed brightly, causing Hagakure to let out a yelp as it flew out of her hands and floated up in the air. She then saw the medallion that Midoriya gave her fly up towards it, and it was absorbed by the mirror. She looked at it with wide eyes as the mirror lowered itself before flying over to a piece of rubble that landed quite far from the remains of the building, and it hummed with power. A loud crash was heard from the sky, causing people to stop with what they were doing and watched as a large beam of light appeared over the mirror and the piece of rubble. All of a sudden, the top of the rubble began to move, causing everyone to slowly make their way over to the rubble. It continued to move until a hand broke through the rubble and grabbed the mirror, startling everyone as then the top of the rubble moved until something popped up. "Cough well, my entire body hurts from that. Note to self, never do that again, unless I can use it to my advantage." Midoriya appeared from the rubble as he stood up, and with Bakugo in his arms baggage style. He then brought his hand in front of his face and looked at his broken finger. He then saw everyone and cocked his head to the side as he looked at everyone's gaping mouths in confusion. "What?" Everyone fell down comically, and some even wanted to facepalm at Midoriya's confusion. After that, people crowded around Midoriya as looked at dazzling mirror before absorbing it as it disappeared, gaining energy back and felt better as several of his wounds healed up. He sighed before stumbling a little and slowly placed Bakugo to the ground, while Kirishima and Kaminari helped him stabilize as they helped him walk towards the group. Several medical robots rushed in and carried Bakugo out of the training grounds. "Man, Midoriya, didn't know you were this powerful," Kirishima said. Kaminari nodded. "Yeah, dude, that was pretty intense, scary even. Glad to see that the both of you are okay, even though Bakugo's behavior is less than ideal. What matters is that both of you are safe." Midoriya could only nod as fatigue was slowly getting the best of him. Once they made it to the group, Yaoyorozu and Uraraka were the first ones to meet the group, soon followed by the rest of the group shortly after. "Are you okay, Deku?" Uraraka said as she looked at Midoriya with worry. He slightly flinched at his nickname, but didn't let that get the best of him and mustered up a small smile to her. "I'm fine mostly." Midoriya coughed out and ended up passing out, causing everyone to become worried. All Might stepped forward and grabbed Midoriya from the two boys. He then looked at the rest of the class. "I'm canceling the simulation for now. Please return to class while I escort young Midoriya to the infirmary," All Might said as he turned around and left the grounds, leaving behind Class 1A as they looked at each other with worried expressions as they changed out of their hero costumes and made their way to their class. "Do you think that Midoriya will be okay?" Ishido asked. Her voice was solemn, which surprised a couple of people as her normal, outgoing personality disappeared. "I'm sure he's fine, but he did seem pretty out of it," Shoji said, Tokoyami nodding in agreement as they continued to walk. "Man, that was some serious power though," Sato said. People agreed as they remembered the intense clash that they had. Hagakure and Yaoyorozu were silent as they didn't really do much in that match, as they basically left the entire match to those two. Yaoyorozu clenched her fist as she felt useless in that match, while Hagakure was thinking that she didn't do anything as she had Midoriya's medallion do all the work. Both of them sighed sadly. "Are you okay, Hagakure?" She turned and saw Ojiro's grim expression as he looked at her with worry in his eyes. "I don't know," she muttered out. Ojiro took her answer as he didn't have much to say either. Midoriya woke up groggily as he looked at his surroundings, hearing an old lady's voice, and then he heard another one as his vision slowly came back to him. He looked at his surroundings, seeing the all-too-familiar window and walls. He then looked down and saw he had bandages wrapped around his body and legs. He then looked over and saw Recovery Girl talking to All Might in his true form. So, she must know All Might's true form, figures. Toshinori saw his pupil from the corner of his eye and walked over to him, followed by Recovery Girl. "How you feeling, kid?" Toshinori asked while Recovery Girl checked everything just in case. "A lot better, thankfully," Midoriya said as he looked out the window, seeing the sun setting. He then looked at Toshinori before sighing as his body felt better than when he was at the grounds. Recovery Girl finished her checkup and told him that he was able to leave. "Geez, this is the way too many visits, kid. You need to get your successor in check, Toshi," she said as she grumbled about recklessness and idiot teachers. The both of them chuckled as Toshinori helped Midoriya out of bed and got him to his feet. He then looked at the other side and saw Bakugo still unconscious and frowned. "Don't worry, he's going to be okay." The boy nodded and made his way out of the room, and then faced his mentor. "I'm sorry for what happened at the simulation. I should have stopped it from going that far," Toshinori said as he looked down at Midoriya, who just gave him a small smile. "Don't worry about it. Plus it helped me develop a new move for OFA," Midoriya said, causing the older man to smile widely as he nodded at the boy before ushering him off to class while he stayed in the infirmary for a bit. Midoriya nodded and waved goodbye to him before making his way to Class 1A. He met up with Ida halfway to the class as he helped Midoriya walk to the classroom. "Thanks, Ida." "You don't need to thank me, Midoriya, just helping a fellow friend in need." They both smiled at each other before making their way to their class, meeting a couple more people that were waiting outside the classroom. Uraraka smiled and ran up to them, followed by Kirishima and Ishido. They all had smiles on their faces as they saw Midoriya was okay. "Feeling better, Midoriya?" Kirishima said as he also went over and helped Ida with him. The green-haired boy nodded in appreciation as the two other boys helped him into the classroom. Everyone sighed in relief as they saw that Midoriya was okay, especially Yaoyorozu, as they all made their way over to him. Everyone was crowding around him, but Ida told everyone to back up as he helped him sit down at a chair that was pulled out for him by Kota. "Thanks, Kota," Midoriya said as he sat down and rested his body, as the trek to the class made him tired. Kota nodded, and everyone crowded around the seated boy. They all asked if he was all right, which he nodded, and then explained that his body was healing fine thanks to Recovery Girl, and that he would be good to go again in a couple of days. After that, everyone started to converse with each other while they waited for All Might to appear. A couple of minutes later, he appeared and released everyone for the day. Everyone walked out and stood at the gates, except for Todoroki as he went straight home. Everyone else stayed back as they all discussed what they were doing after school, and that's when Ishido brought up the group dinner. Everyone was on board except for a couple of people. "Sorry guys, but my family is eating out, and I would like to spend some time with them. But I'm in for the next time we do it," Sato said as she waved goodbye to everyone and left. "I have an appointment with my stylist, so I can't. My apologies, au revoir," Aoyama said as he left the group, doing some over-dramatic pose and dashed off. People sweat dropped at his antics and watch him leave. Kota left while waving goodbye as he had to go help his mother out around the house. Everyone else was free as they made their way over to the same place that they went last time. The owner was more than happy to serve them as there was currently nobody else but them in the place, so they had a big dinner with everyone having a blast. Midoriya smiled as he saw everyone getting along with each other and took a bite out of his food and savored the taste as he sighed with happiness. A napkin was handed to him, and he looked and saw Yaoyorozu smiling. He thanked her and wiped his face before smiling at her. "How are you feeling?" she asked him, a look of curiosity on her face. He rolled his shoulder, feeling it pop, and then he stretched out his arms. "Yeah, I feel great actually." he said as he then turned to see Ida and Uraraka sitting down with their food. The owner said dinner is on him, which is very kind of him, but I intend to pay for his kindness. Do you have 500 yen on you? Midoriya was about to grab one from his pocket, but Yaoyorozu stopped him and pulled out a fortune from her wallet and handed it to Ida, who looked at her with his mouth agape. She waved him off. Don't worry, I have a lot more money, so don't worry. Tell him I appreciate what he's doing for us. Ida just nodded and walked back to the owner. Uraraka looked at Yaoyorozu. You're rich, Yaoyorozu? She nodded, and then they all began to eat once Ida got back. The whole night was amazing as everyone laughed the night away. Chapter 5. An Unforeseen Incident. A couple of days after the simulation, Bakugo was being reprimanded and placed into a therapeutic remedial class in order to get his anger into check. Class was back in session as Midoriya was currently creating a notebook for Class 1A as he wrote down bios for everyone and their quirks for future use. He was currently on Yaoyorozu right after his as he wrote down her name and her quirk before writing down a summary of her quirk. He finished her bio and nodded before putting the notebook away and looked forward as Aizawa walked through the door while dragging his sleeping bag with him. Everyone settled down as he made his way to the front of the class and stared at everyone. Pick a class representative, he said, and then got into his sleeping bag before passing out just like that. But everyone else didn't care as they all started to raise their hands. I would like to be it, Ashido said while erratically waving her hand in the air. I'll gladly be it, Kaminari said to Jiro, who smirked at him and shook her head. Midoriya just sat there as he looked around the room, seeing the excitement of everyone as they all were saying that they wanted to do it. He then looked at Yaoyorozu, who was fidgeting with her hands as she looked around the room and then at everyone's hands. She must want to be the representative. I think I'd like for her to be it. He then looked up at Ida, who had stood up and looked at the class. I say we should decide who it should be, democratic style, he said as he fixed his glasses. People deadpanned at him as his hand was still very much in the air. Midoriya agreed with him as they all voted on who it should be and wrote Yaoyorozu on a piece of paper and passed it to the front of the room. Aizawa woke up from his nap and collected the pieces of paper. He then went over to the board and wrote everyone's names on it before writing numbers next to each of the names. Midoriya looked at the board with shock. There you have it. Midoriya will now be your class president while Yaoyorozu will be the vice president. Congratulations to the both of you. Now you can go back to whatever you were doing, Aizawa said before leaving the room with his sleeping bag. Everyone looked at the door in confusion before starting their own conversations. Midoriya just looked at the board with shock. I got 4 votes, but how? He was muttering to himself until Yaoyorozu tapped him and brought him out of his muttering spree. He looked at her, noticing her downcast look even if she tried to hide it with her smile, which nearly blinded him. She sat on his desk as she grabbed one of his notebooks that he just brought out to continue working on it and looked through all of it before stopping on one of the pages. Can I see your pencil, Midoriya? He handed her his pencil and watched as she began to write something down, looking at it several times as if it was an artwork. Nodding, she handed it back to him and smiled. He then looked to see that she was looking through his notebook for the class, more specifically on her own page. He then blushed a bit, but noticed that she wrote some extra information, like her birthday and favorite things. He then turned back to her as he saw her smile that was hiding her sadness, and that didn't go unnoticed as he felt a tug in her direction, and it almost looked like she was glowing a lot less in the sun than the others. He was about to question it, but deemed it as one of his powers and placed his hand on hers. Yaoyorozu, are you okay? He asked, seeing her shoulders tense up as her breath hitched, and he felt the exact same tug he felt earlier, only more forceful as the air around her grew more cold and eerie. It was like her light bulb went out as she didn't look at him for a little bit until she turned and had a glare that nearly made him faint because how scary she looked, her eyes piercing his very soul as Midoriya tried not to wet himself at how utter terrifying she looked. It was all silence as Yaoyorozu glared at the poor boy while the boy was starting to sweat a lot. All of a sudden, someone coughed, causing the two of them to turn and saw Ida looking at the two of them. Excuse me, but the bell for lunch just rang. Midoriya, would you like to eat with me and Uraraka? Ida asked, noticing that the vice president was glaring at the poor boy. Yeah, too woo-wooed like too. He quickly got up and basically bolted out of the room. Ida smiled and turned around to follow his friend to the lunchroom, but still noticed Yaoyorozu's glare intensify when Midoriya answered his question, but didn't question her as he made his way to the lunchroom. Yaoyorozu watched Ida leave the room before looking down sadly as she felt really bad for getting angry at Midoriya for something he didn't have much control over. But she really wanted the position, and hearing that she got second place made her snap. She was so used to being first in a lot of things, and she wasn't being arrogant. She just did her very best at everything in order to be the very best she could be. The girl then noticed another notebook that Midoriya left and grabbed it before opening it after a little argument she had in her head and turned to see names of people in the class. What intrigued her was the descriptions that they had next to them, learning how Midoriya thinks of them. Then, she had an idea and looked for her name. Flipping through pages, she finally found her name. She then noticed the description of lack of one, but there was a small bit of writing to it, so she looked and read it. I can't really think of much for her except for that she's really mature, friendly, intelligent, and really beautiful. As she read over those words, her mind just went blank as her head malfunctioned. She blushed profusely as her mind was slowly trying to comprehend what was just said and what she just read. Many thoughts were running through her mind as she dropped the notebook, but she didn't care as her face was getting hot and her heart was pounding. He called me beautiful. She shook her head as she placed a hand over her chest. She was so confused, but a smile was threatening her lips as her feelings for the boy slowly was brought back. However, her feelings for him were not settled just yet as she wanted to be 100% sure that she liked him for the sake of both of them. It did make her very happy that he thought she was beautiful, but they only just met a couple of days ago. Yaoyorozu sighed and grabbed the notebook she dropped, then made her way to the cafeteria. Her behavior earlier made her heat clench in guilt as she basically lashed out at the boy without even saying anything. I have to apologize to Midoriya. He looked so scared and probably thinks I hate him now. She then nodded and had a boost of confidence as she made her way to the cafeteria, already making up a plan to apologize to him. Midoriya was picking at his food as the look on Yaoyorozu's face was etched into his mind. His mood darkened, and it showed in his appearance as his eyes seemed dull, and the air around him was a lot less warm feeling. Uraraka looked at the boy in concern, but was stopped by Ida, who shook his head. She slumped in her chair as his mood affected her as well as Ida. The whole table sat in silence as they all looked at their food with disinterest, even moving the food away from them. Even when Kaminari, Kirishima, Jiro, Ashido, and Tsu joined them, the table was silent. The newcomers looked at Midoriya and felt that his presence was a lot different from the one he had at the dinner party. So, congratulations on becoming class president, Midori. Ashido exclaimed as she had a huge smile on her face in order to cheer him up. Kirishima joined in as he patted Midoriya's back and gave him a thumbs up. Yeah, congratulations, bro. You'll do great, he said, and then turned to Kaminari and Jiro before motioning them to help with brightening his mood. I did want to become the president, but I feel like you would do a much better job than me, Midoriya, Kaminari said awkwardly and looked sheepishly at Jiro. She sighed and shook her head and was about to speak until she saw Yaoyorozu walking up to the table. Midoriya, can we talk? Midoriya heard Yaoyorozu's voice and stiffened before slowly nodding his head. They both walked off to a spot where they could have some privacy. Once they found the place, Midoriya looked at her with confusion and a hint of fear, but noticed that her demeanor was a lot less hostile, which calmed his nerves a little as he expected the worst. She sighed and then turned around to face Midoriya before bowing down to him, which startled him as she lowered her head to the ground. I'm very sorry for my behavior this morning. I was extremely jealous and angry because I wanted to become the president of the class, but then you won it. And that made me very mad at you while you didn't do anything wrong. Once again, I'm very sorry for that. Please, I hope we're still friends, Midoriya. She lowered her head to the floor as she didn't dare to look up at him. That is until he let out a sigh of relief. So, that's why you were mad at me. I thought it was because of the notebook bio, he said as he chuckled embarrassingly as he scratched his cheek. She looked up at him with shock before getting up and suddenly embraced the boy, which caused his mind to shut down as he felt her press herself onto him as she tightened her embrace and chuckled. Her aroma was intoxicating to him, but was confused on why she was doing. WWHY are you hugging me, Yaoyorozu? He asked, even though he was enjoying himself, not in the perverted way, but rather in an affectionate way. Well, I was kind of scared that you hated at me, but to think that you thought I was mad over what you put down in your notebook for the class is kind of funny. But I'm glad that you don't, she said as she clung to him, smiling as she continued her embrace. To be honest, I thought you hated me, and I also saw that you really wanted to be the representative. I'm sorry for that. Don't be. All thought my previous actions say otherwise. I'm really happy that you won. You know, I can just give you my position in. Midoriya was interrupted as she covered his mouth with her hand as she glared at him, but with a hint of playfulness danced in her eyes as she removed her hand and shook her head at him. No, please don't do that. I voted for myself, but I think that you would do a better job at being the representative than I would, she said as she smiled at him. Actually, I voted for you, Yaoyorozu, Midoriya said while going back to scratching his cheek. She looked at him before smiling and once more tightened her hug as she rested her head on his shoulder. Thank you, she said, and then a smirk grew on her face as she got closer to his ear. So you think I'm very beautiful, Midoriya? She whispered to his ear, causing him to gain a massive blush, but he nodded. She chuckled as she released him from her embrace and smiled at him. He assumed that since she asked that question, she must have read that notebook, but he didn't really mind too much since it was her. Well, thank you for the compliment. Midoriya looked at her before smiling and chuckled to himself as they stood there, looking at each other before she then started to fidget with her hands, twirling her fingers together for a while. He looked at her with concern as she would open her mouth and then close it, repeating those two actions. He also noticed the blush that appeared on her cheeks as she started to stammer out her statement, but then she stopped and looked down in embarrassment. After a couple of minutes of silence, she suddenly grabbed his hands and forced him to look at her. Will you go out on a date with me? She said, breathing heavily as she finally got it out. Midoriya just stared at her before his brain went poof, as his mind was racing at light speed as he was trying to comprehend what she said, even though he knew exactly what she said. He looked at her, and then he thought for a moment before looking at her. He steeled his nerves and calmly looked at her. I would gladly go on a date with you. Those words made Yaoyorozu's mind just explode as she was giggling like a schoolgirl as her feelings for him were slowly reaching that 100% certainty. Midoriya was still in shock that the most beautiful girl asked him out on a date, but he slowly accepted it and smiled as he felt even closer to her, and maybe he had a chance to date her, even though they had just recently met, as it seemed a bit surreal like one of those love stories. However, he shook his head at that, and the both of them just smiled at each other. All of a sudden, growling could be heard as Midoriya turned to see Yaoyorozu gripping her stomach with embarrassment as the growling continued. Oh right, you still haven't eaten yet, have you? Midoriya asked and she nodded. They were about to leave, but she stopped him. Please, call me Momo, Izuku. She had a sly smile on her face as she saw his reaction and chuckled as she turned around and made her way to the cafeteria. Midoriya shook his head and followed his friend to the cafeteria, a smile on his. They made their war back to the cafeteria where she grabbed her food and wailed back to the group, seeing Ishido was waving at them. They got back to the table and was greeted by everyone as Midoriya returned to his original seat and Yaoyorozu took the spot next to him. So, your issue is resolved, I take it? Ida said to the both of them, which they nodded, and he nodded back. Everyone else had finished their food and was talking about the next dinner that they had in mind. Apparently, the diner that they had eaten in was getting refurbished, so they had to find somewhere else to go and hang out. Places were thrown around, and even Tokoyami and Shoji also partook in the conversation on where to go as they were leaving the room. So, it's between the buffet near the station, the pretty big and popular one, or the sushi place near the cinema, Kaminari said as he looked at everyone. I vote for the sushi place since there is a karaoke right across the street, Ishido said as she started to act like she was holding a microphone and began to sing something off-key, which kind of disturbed and aggravated Jiro, as she also knew the song that Ishido was singing. Kirishima also agreed on the sushi place as he really liked that place. Either way, it doesn't matter to me. As long as we have fun and bond, I don't care where we eat, Midoriya said as he ate his now cold noodles. That's why I voted for you, Karo, Tsu said to Midoriya. He looked at her in surprise, but thanked her. Thanks, Tsu, but why though? Midoriya asked, to which the frog girl placed her hand on her chin before looking at him. Your kindness and overall character is what got me to vote for you. At the dinner parties, you always talked to everyone and got everyone's input. That's why I voted for you. Shortened down. It's actually a lot more complicated though. And call me Tsu, Karo. Midoriya smiled and nodded to her. I must admit that I voted for you as well, Midoriya, Ida said, which stunned everyone. Didn't you want to become the representative, Ida? You had 0 votes, so you didn't even vote for yourself? Kirishima asked him. Ida sighed before turning to Midoriya. I could have voted for myself, but I saw more potential in Midoriya than myself, so naturally, I voted for him as someone that can fill the position better than me, as I still have a long ways to go before I can surpass Midoriya. He said, a fire burning in his soul as he declared Midoriya his rival. But the boy smiled as he nodded at his friend's conviction, a bond between the two growing into something more. I also voted for you, Deku. Uraraka pipped in as she had a big smile on her face, which the green-haired boy reciprocated, but then grew a confused look. That makes 3 votes, and I know Momo didn't vote for me. So how did? He then saw Kirishima raise his hand as he smiled at his classmate. I did, bro. I don't much of a reason, but you're the manliest man I've seen ever, so I voted for you. Midoriya chuckled as he thanked the redhead before they all went back to the conversation about the dinner and where they were going to eat. Eventually, they decided on the sushi place, then they were going to go to the karaoke place after. How about Friday, which is in 2 days from now? Yaoyorozu said as she checked her calendar on her phone, then looked at everyone. They agreed, and then she sent that to the Class 1A group chat. She pocketed her phone and nodded to everyone as she began to dig into her food, moaning in bliss as her food was delicious. All of a sudden, an alarm suddenly blared as people started to panic as the intercom came on saying that the campus was breached by a villain, which caused everyone to panic and started to run. Midoriya looked around as people were pushing one another, trying to evacuate the cafeteria. He got separated from most of the group, but he managed to group up with Tsuyu. Midoriya met up with her, but then was immediately pushed to the window. He then gazed out the window and saw Aizawa and a bunch of reporters before turning back to the crowd. They don't see the reporters because everyone is panicking. Damn, I need to stop this. Just need to find somewhere I can get everyone's attention. Right there. He saw the area above the entrance and then headed over there, once again meeting up with Tsuyu. Tsuyu, can you get me up there? He pointed to the area, which she nodded and quickly grabbed him with her tongue and jumped to the nearest pillar. She then managed to place him onto the platform. He gave her a thumbs up before looking at the wave of students as they streamed out of the area. Midoriya then quickly made a wall of sunlight that blocked the entrance, causing people to look up at him with anger, but he held his hand up and then pointed to the window. Listen, it's just reporters, please calm down. Nothing serious is happening, so please calm down and carry on. People looked and saw that what he said was true, and then people calmed down before going back to what they were doing. Midoriya sighed as he jumped down from the platform and dispelled the wall. Then he sighed in relief. He felt suddenly exhausted from what just happened, but he sighed and walked over to his table, seeing that everyone else had already made it there. He saw the approving look of Ida and the rest had a look of respect for him as he sat down and looked at everyone smiling at him. What? He said to everyone, but all they did was chuckle, which furthered his confusion, but then Ida placed his hand on his shoulder and gave him a thumbs up. What you just displayed is why I voted for you, Midoriya. Being able to assess the situation and remain calm, and then you took hold of the situation and resolved it. I have much to learn in order to surpass you, he said as he pushed up his glasses. Midoriya blushed at the comment and thanked everyone before finally finishing his cold noodles. Once they all cleaned up, the table was cleaned, they all walked back to the classroom. A couple of minutes passed as the rest of the class trickled in, and finally entering was Bakugo and Aizawa. The blonde had an irritated look on his face while the teacher had the same old dead look he always showed. Once Bakugo was seated, Aizawa sighed and looked at the class. We will be heading out to do a lesson on rescue situations. Please wear your PE uniforms and meet at the entrance of the campus area. Aizawa walked out of the room as everyone started to get their uniforms and changed into them before going to the entrance to the campus. A bus was waiting as Aizawa was standing there all gloom and doom, counting each person as they got on the bus, and when they had 20, He got in and motioned for the driver to start heading over to the area they were going to have the lesson. Midoriya sat in the middle with Tsu and Kirishima as he looked out the window and frowned when he saw that the sun wasn't shining as bright as it should be, which got him on edge. His gut feeling was telling him something was bound to happen, and it wasn't going to be something that's all fun and games. He looked away from the window and bit his thumb as his irritation was growing from the feeling in his stomach, but he forced it to the back of his mind. "Are you all right, Midoriya?" He turned to Tsu, who was looking at him with her normal passive expression, but had a hint of concern in her words as she looked at him. He looked at her and shook his head. "I'm fine, Tsu. Just thinking about something, that's all," Midoriya said as he looked back out the window before turning around, never looking behind him after that. Tsu looked at him before letting it go and sat there, turning her gaze towards Bakugo as he had his feet on one of the seats and had his normal explosive expression. He then snapped at Shiro and Kaminari as they were making fun of him as they were comparing him to Midoriya and their contrasting personalities. This led Tsu to join the conversation as she basically said she preferred Midoriya over Bakugo. Then she called the blonde's attitude burning rubbish, which set him off, but also sparked Kaminari to also get into it. "How vulgar." Yaoyorozu looked at Bakugo and sighed in exasperation, triggering a little chuckle from Uraraka as they both smiled at each other and looked out the window, seeing the building as they entered a parking lot in front of the building. Everyone then started to trickle out of the bus, starting with Aizawa and ending with Sato. They looked at the massive building that was in front of them, taking in the sight as the door opened, revealing the pro hero, 13. Both Midoriya and Uraraka were bouncing happily as Uraraka got to see her favorite hero while Midoriya was being Midoriya. 13. Where's All Might? Aizawa asked as he looked for the symbol of peace. He was busy and had to handle something for Principal Nizu. 13 said, but then looked over Aizawa's shoulder, straight at Midoriya, and held up 3 fingers. The boy looked at the hero for a solid 20 seconds before getting it and nodded towards the hero, which made him subconsciously bite his thumb as the feeling came back. So, All Might went over his limit. That's not good, especially since I feel like something bad's about to happen as the sun isn't as bright and clouds were rolling in. That's not a good omen. Problem is, what's going to happen? Midoriya thought as he surveyed the area for anything that was out of the ordinary, but he couldn't see anything wrong nor sense anything as the clouds were now rolling over and thunder being heard in the distance. He cursed as his solar powers were no going to be at normal power now as he didn't have the boost of the sun, but this also proved beneficial as his lunar powers could now do damage like his solar energy, but it's still not as strong as it isn't technically nighttime, a sort of pseudo-night in a way. With that in hand, he closed his eyes and opened them, revealing that his eyes were now a silver color with a hit of yellow as it allowed him to have heightened senses and sight. He looked around him again, this time seeing a sort of ripple near the fountain at the bottom of the stairs. He focused his eyes and saw a black and purple energy slowly leaking from small gaps in the area. It was almost impossible to see to the naked eye, but it was also a bit strenuous as he closed his eyes, feeling the slight dryness in his eyes. He blinked and stepped next to Aizawa, who looked at the boy then back at the lecture that 13 was giving to the class about rescue. "What is it, Midoriya? You weren't paying attention to the lecture," Aizawa said bluntly as he looked down at the kid. "I'm sure you've noticed the slight distortion near the fountain, yeah? What is that?" Midoriya asked, causing his teacher to once again give him a large grin before dropping it and glanced at the fountain. "I see, so you've noticed too then, huh? Most likely, a villain attack." "What are we supposed to do, Mr. Aizawa?" Midoriya asked as the ripples in the fountain area were beginning to get bigger and bigger. Then the boy also noticed ripples beginning to appear all around them, which caused him to grit his teeth as the situation was starting to get a lot worse. Midoriya's tugging feeling in his stomach started to go on overdrive as the ripples started to become more and more intense. By now 13 had stopped teaching as he also noticed the ripples, but Midoriya's classmates were oblivious to what was going on, except for Todoroki and Bakugo as their combat ability triggered their weariness. All of a sudden, a dagger was launched from out of nowhere as it bolted through the air and almost hit Jiro, but Midoriya was able to react fast enough and brought forth a barrier in front of her. The weapon collided with the barrier and was stuck in it. Then, The barrier hummed as it absorbed the dagger and transformed it into energy. Jiro looked at Midoriya with appreciation and fear. The boy then turned towards the direction the dagger was thrown and glared at the area. Damn it, my suspicions were correct. We're about to be surrounded by a bunch of villains with little to no actual combat experience. This will be rough. Midoriya thought as he then turned towards the fountain as there was a sudden release of energy. There he saw the black and purple energy slowly leak out of an opening. But then someone forcibly ripped the opening as it revealed a man with several hands all around his arms and one that was covering his face. Following suit was man in a suit, but his entire body was made of black and purple mist, which looked exactly like the mist that appeared all over the bottom area. After that, a bunch of people appeared as a mass of people were now at the bottom of the stairs. Midoriya soon noticed the energy that was near the group as it retreated down to the ground level. He eyed the mist guy and marked him as the culprit. He must be the one responsible for the mist. So he can teleport people using that mist, but can he control it so he can place anything where he sees fit? If he does, then this will be even tougher if he manages to split us up. Midoriya clenched his fist as he felt a battle was about to take place, and this will be one they had to win. So, they were the ones that triggered the alarm this morning, Aizawa said as his capture gear and his goggles became visible as he looked at the man in the middle. The man seemed to know that he was being looked at and laughed out loud. His menacing laugh rang through the building, causing many of the students to flinch at the humorous laugh. He stopped as he looked around before scratching his head roughly. Where's All Might? My sources says he was supposed to be here, not a bunch of UA kids and their teachers. No matter, we can just kill them all. Now that will get his attention, he shouted out, causing Midoriya to look at him in confusion before slowly piecing it together and brought his hand to his chin. So, they planned on All Might being here so that they can kill him, and Mr. Aizawa said that they might have triggered the alarm, not the reporters. Whoever we're facing, they are really dangerous. Midoriya gritted his teeth as he now saw that combat was unavoidable as villains started to charge forward, running up the steps as their crazed looks had bloodlust written all over them. Midoriya was scared for his life, but right now, that didn't matter as he looked at the waves of villains coming up the steps. Damn, looks like we have no choice but to fight. Chapter 6, Attack on Class 1A. Midoriya was about to fight, but Aizawa blocked him as the pro hero placed his goggles on his face and his scarf began to float. No, stay here with the rest of your class as you're one of the only people that can fight. Leave this to me. After all, I am a hero, Aizawa said as he parried a punch that came his way and sucker punched the villain in the gut while capturing some villains and used them as a wrecking ball, knocking down them left and right before dropping them on top of some more. The villains focused their attacks on the pro hero as they saw him as the immediate threat. 13 had everyone huddled together as he watched over to the class. People were looking on with worry as they heard the sounds of combat, while Midoriya was looking around as he felt the presence of somebody nearby and quickly looked as the purple mist began to envelope the group. After some time, Ida looked around and saw over half of their class was gone as the man made of mist appeared and bowed to them. Hello there, young UA students. My name is Kurojiri, and we are the League of Villains. He motioned to himself and the crowd. 13 didn't respond as he sucked in the villain, but Kurojiri used the pro hero's quirk against him as he let himself get sucked in and then basically tore the hero apart. He then looked as the rest of the students blocking his way as Shoji and Tokomi were the vanguard while Uraraka and Hagakure were the rearguard, protecting the fallen hero as they were scared, but they knew that their lives were on the line. Ida was worried as he didn't see Midoriya, Bakugo, Todoroki, or Yaoyorozu, which he cursed as they were the top 4 strongest in the class, according to him. He felt a hand on his shoulder and saw Koda looking really nervous, but he had a look that said that he was ready for anything. Ida nodded and stood in the vanguard with the rest as they were about to be in a different ballpark. Fear was evident in the group as they never faced a villain before, but they were about to experience it firsthand. Everyone, we need to survive this, Ida yelled out, and was followed by voices of agreement as they faced Kurojiri and the attack of the villains. Midoriya gained conscious as he looked around, noticing the copious amount of water in his vision, until he saw that he was underwater. He quickly looked around as he then started to swim up, and then sensed something that was coming face to his left. Not even looking at the direction, Midoriya quickly dodged to the left and sent a beam of light that connected with a guy with a shark face. He then was grabbed by something and pulled him out of the water and placed him on the boat deck. He gasped for breath as he then saw Mineta getting slammed onto the deck with a loud cry in pain. He then saw Tsu getting onto the deck as she looked at Midoriya and smiled as she then turned to the purple-haired boy with a glare. "Thanks for that, Tsu," Midoriya said as he recovered from the warping and looked around them and noticed that they were in the water simulation. Then he looked and saw shadows making their way towards the boat. He then focused on those shadows and saw that there was a massive amount of villains lurking in the water and cursed as he looked at his two companions. Well, one as he saw Mineta freaking out and was basically out of commission, leaving him with just two. But he looked up as he saw that the clouds had began to disperse and the rays of the sun began to pierce through some of the clouds and grinned. He then looked as he saw the villains began to gather around the boat, waiting as they stared at the trio with bloodlust. "We may have the advantage here," Midoriya said as he looked at his two companions, one giving him a confused look. "Are you insane? How in the world do we have the advantage?" The other yelled out as tears were running down his face as he then went back to curling himself up into a ball and cried as he thought it was over. "Karo, what do you mean, Midoriya?" Tsuyu asked. He smirked and held up two fingers. "We have two advantages. One is the element of surprise," he said to her, but she looked at him confused. "What does that mean, Karo?" she asked, bringing her finger to her chin. He smiled and pointed to her. "They don't know our quirks, but we know ours and each other's. Better to say that we are familiar with each other's quirks. If they didn't know our quirks, why are you here, in an area you excel at and not a place where you would most likely die?" That supports the point that they don't know what our quirks are. The second advantage is that these guys are grunts most likely. Only the guy with the weird hand mask and the mist guy seem to be like the ones we need to look out for. It looks a lot more like quantity, not quality, so we can beat them, Midoriya said to the frog girl, who nodded. All of a sudden, a loud explosion was heard and caused the boat to rock side to side. They all turned to the area where the explosion occurred. The green-haired boy frowned as he looked at Mineta and Tsu, then looked at the area again. "So, we weren't the only ones that were teleported. Man, I'm worried about everyone." He then summoned a little orb of light and launched it up into the air. His eye color changed into its solar state, and then into eagle eyes as he examined the area using the orb he had sent up, seeing Aizawa continuing to defeat the grunts of the villain force. And then he cursed loudly. "Damn it. The rest of our class is facing that mist guy and 13 is down for the count. I don't see Yaoyorozu, Kaminari, Jiro, Bakugo, Kirishima, and Todoroki. So, those are the ones that got warped like us." Midoriya sighed as his eyes returned to normal. It once again turned to its orange-yellow. He sighed as he grabbed the orb, and it disappeared. He then looked at Tsuyu and Mineta. "We need to get out of here. The villains here will most likely try and capsize the boat." Midoriya then looked at Tsuyu. Wait. They both turned to their third companion, seeing the tears streaming down his face as he had his hands into fist, looking at the both of them. "Why are you doing this? You know it's dangerous, and yet you still do it," Mineta yelled at the two of them. Then an explosion was heard right next to them as the boat started to sink. Midoriya closed his eyes and sighed before looking at the shorter boy of the two. "I know you're scared, Mineta, but we have to do this. We are training to become heroes, and if we run from this, what about the rest of our classmates? I don't know about you, but that's something that I don't want answered. Everyone is out there fighting to survive, so we need to do so as well. See, are you ready?" Midoriya didn't wait for her answer as he watched the boat sink slowly as the villains looked at him with lust for blood as they got ready for him to become their victim. Midoriya jumped into the air and held out his hand with his middle finger held down by his thumb. He breathed out before waiting for the right opportunity and took it. Delaware Smash. Midoriya flicked his middle finger as OFA energy released, sending a large shockwave into the water and while creating a large amount of wind. The move displaced the water, and then a couple of seconds later a large vortex of water appeared as the quick displacement and the rushing water as it rapidly collected itself ensnared the villains. "Tsu!" Midoriya yelled out. The frog girl nodded and grabbed Mineta before jumping out of the sinking boat and caught Midoriya with her tongue as they managed to escape the simulation area. Mineta, however, was still in turmoil as the words of Midoriya was slowly pitching away at his heart. He was scared, but the words of his classmate brought some light to the boy. He wanted to be a hero, so he grabbed his grape-like balls from his head and began to throw it at the vortex, causing the balls to stick on the villains, and then it stuck villains together as the vortex sucked them in, effectively defeating them. Midoriya looked stunned for a bit, but then smiled at the boy, who gave him a thumbs up as blood trickled down his forehead. "Ida, go? We can cover you while you go get help," Shoji said as he blocked an attack from Kurogiri. The black-haired boy was conflicted as he didn't want to leave his classmates behind, but his gut feeling was telling him to go while his mind was telling him to stay and protect his classmates. "Ida, don't worry about us. We need you to go get help. Come on," Ojiro said as he blocked an attack and tried to counter but ended up hitting the mist. Ida watched as his classmates were protecting him from Kurogiri. He gritted his teeth and began to run towards the exit, but Kurogiri warped in front of him and tried to warp him away from the exit. But Uraraka managed to touch one of the metal plates that the villain wore from behind and caused him to go into zero gravity. Ida looked at her in shock. "Go, Ida, we'll be all right," she said to him. He looked at her before nodding and zoomed out of the building, bolting to the academy with a serious look on his face. "I will protect my classmates," Ida said as he picked up his speed. Kurogiri grunted and warped to the hand-masked man. "Shigaraki, 13 has been dealt with, but a student left to get help. This is a bust," Kurogiri said to Shigaraki, who grew frustrated as he clawed at his face with irritation. "We won't be able to handle reinforcements, but we can kill these students before they arrive," the hand-masked man said as he let out a maniacal laugh. The laugh was heard throughout the building, sending shivers through all of the students. "Damn, that was creepy," Jiro said as she hid underneath the electric-resistant blanket created by Yaoyorozu as Kaminari was electrocuting everyone in the vicinity with his quirk. Jiro sighed as she looked at the rocky terrain they were in, then her eyes landed on Yaoyorozu, or more specifically the lack of covering of her chest area, showing her endowments to the petite girl, which caused her to go self-conscious and placed her hands on her chest. "Lucky," Jiro stared at the black-haired girl with envy, but then she shook her head and got her attention. "Ah, Yamamo, your top is ripped," Jiro said as she fought back a blush. Yaoyorozu looked down and saw her chest was in full view, but she shrugged and made herself a black bra. "Hey, can you help me with this, Jiro?" The purple-haired girl nodded and grabbed the bra from her and helped her put it on, taking a couple of minutes. But they were in no rush as Kaminari had defeated all of the villains. Both of the girls emerged from the blanket and looked at all of the fried villains. Then they sighed in relief as they were safe for now. "Hey Kaminari, what do you do?" Jiro turned the boy around and nearly died laughing. His face looked like an idiot as he had his hands and thumbs up as he walked around the area. Jiro was rolling on the ground laughing as she couldn't get the face out of her mind. Yaoyorozu chuckled at her friends, but frowned when she heard several more explosions that were occurring all around them. "Midoriya, I hope you're okay," she sighed as she looked up at the sky. "Move out of the way, bastards." Bakugo yelled as he fired off several explosions while Kirishima was fighting right next to him at the run simulation. Both of them were defeating villains left and right. "This guy is crazy," one of the villains said as he tried to escape, but was caught by Kirishima as he was then beaten into a pulp. They continued their fight through the area as more and more villains just kept on coming and coming. "The fuck out of my way," Bakugo yelled out and launched a massive explosion, knocking out the majority of the villains that were there. A feral grin appeared on the blonde's lips as he continued to massacre the forces of villains in his way. And with Kirishima taking out the stragglers, they were an unstoppable force that penetrated the villain forces with ease. "The hell is this kid?" Ice covered the entire area as Todoroki looked at everyone passively as he froze everything in his path. Many of the villains tried to attack the boy, but were soundly defeated as all he did was freeze them. He walked past the numerous amount of villains that he froze and turned to one of them. "Why are you guys here?" Todoroki said, causing the villain to gulp as he saw the growing of ice behind the boy. After a couple of seconds, the villain cracked and told him that they were planning on killing All Might. which caused the boy to look at him before freezing the villains and leaving the area to gain more information on the situation, and he decided to go to the middle of the building. Midoriya, Mineta, and Tsuyu were hiding behind some bushes as the battle was raging on. Mineta was hyperventilating as he hid behind the bush. The other two were scouting the area and found a better spot to hide, so they managed to sneak their way over to there, and now they were even closer to the stairs where most of the class was there. "We're almost there, just gotta keep on going," Midoriya said, but all of a sudden, a loud crash was heard. The three of them hid as they peeked and saw that Aizawa was pinned to the ground by a mysterious black figure with its brain visible and a beak. Following it was the ringleader of the attack as he looked at the pro hero with a sinister grin as he knelt next to Aizawa. "What happened? I thought that you were going to stop us, Eraserhead." Shigaraki then started to laugh loudly as the beast still had Aizawa under his foot. Midoriya had sweat beating down his forehead as he felt uneasy about that thing that had his teacher pinned. The green-haired boy felt his heartbeat increase as he didn't know what to do as he needed to get to safety. But that thing was something that needed to be handled right away, as almost none of Class 1A was able to beat it if it beat a pro hero. He bit his thumb in irritation as he was trying to come up with plans, but was having no luck in doing so, which pissed him off a bit. That was all interrupted as the hiding spot that they were using was thrown to the side as Midoriya was now face to face with the hand mask man. The green-haired boy cursed inward as he didn't notice the presence right next to them as Shigaraki smiled down at the students. "Ah, I see you'll be my first kill of the day." He suddenly appeared in front of Tsu, catching Midoriya off guard as the villain slowly closed his hand around the girl's face, which caused Midoriya to react. "Get away from her," he said and launched a Detroit smash at Shigaraki, but felt nothing as his fist collided with the beast thing. What made the boy surprised is that his punch did no damage to the creature, except for making it mad as it screeched and whacked Midoriya across the chest, sending him flying into the wall. The boy coughed out and grunted as he wasn't able to react in time with a barrier, but he grew even more fearful as he was about to see Tsu get killed as he saw Shigaraki decay a piece of metal with his other hand, and then he imagined Tsu doing the same. He gritted his teeth as he rushed forward and tried to attack the villain, but once again was blocked by the beast. He cursed as he didn't see a way through this, but then saw Aizawa still moving as his quirk was activated, and then he followed the teacher's gaze to Shigaraki, which gave him the necessary things for him to save his two companions. "Apotheon," Midoriya shouted and produced the solar bow. He pulled the string back and inhaled. A large amount of energy appeared as orange and yellow aura appeared around the boy as his hair gained a tint of orange. Once he felt that it was enough, he let go of the arrow and it collided with the beast, sending it right into Shigaraki, who had placed his hand on Tsu, but his quirk was erased by Aizawa. The two of them crashed into the fountain area, giving Midoriya enough time to grab Aizawa and handed him over to Tsu, who was still shaken up from what just happened. The boy noticed this and placed both of his hands on her shoulder. "Tsu, Mineta, we need to get Mr. Aizawa out of here. Please, get him to safety." She nodded slowly as she picked up their homeroom teacher, and she was about to leave, but turned to Midoriya. "Kara, what about you?" she asked him. "I'll try and hold these guys off. Just go," he shouted as he saw the figures emerging from the fountain area and got ready as he held the bow in his hands, charging it up for another shot. Tsu looked at him before nodding and made her way to the top of the stairs, but Kurogiri appeared in front of her and Mineta. "I'm afraid that you guys can." Midoriya launched several arrows at the villain, nicking the metal plates, forcing the villain to get behind his mist, but that allowed Midoriya to close the gap and sent a ray of light directly to Kurogiri's weak point, sending him flying. He nodded to Tsu, who nodded back and ran up the stairs with Mineta in tow. Midoriya watched as they made their way to the top and disappeared after they reached the top. He sighed, then turned back towards the villains. "Inomu, kill that bastard." He heard Shigaraki's voice and a loud screech was heard. Nomu was barreling towards him. Apotheon hummed in his hand as he began to shoot rays of light at the beast, creating several wounds on the beast, much to Shigaraki's shock as Midoriya was laying down a barrage of arrows, which were creating cuts on Nomu's body, and they weren't regenerating due to the solar power in the arrows. Once Nomu was close enough, he threw Apotheon at Nomu, and it created a huge flash of light, blinding Nomu, Shigaraki, and Kurogiri, allowing Midoriya to quickly grab Kurogiri by the plates and smashed him to the ground. Detroit Smash. He directly hit the plates on Kurogiri before he could warp away, dealing major damage to the villain. However, Midoriya ended up getting punched by Nomu as the flash didn't affect the creature and was sent into the fountain, pain soaring through his back and abdomen as he groaned out loud, but he got back up. His hand glowed and he pressed it to his abdomen, then his back, the pain fading away as he felt his energy rejuvenate in him as he glared at the creature. Kurogiri appeared right beside Shigaraki, who was getting more irritated by the minute as Nomu hadn't killed the boy yet. "Damn it, Inoemu. Why isn't he dead yet?" The villain hollered out, which caused Nomu to perk up and then once again charged at Midoriya, only this faster as he shoulder-charged Midoriya, causing the boy to go on the defensive as Nomu started to punch the barrier around Midoriya at a rapid pace, making cracks on the barrier. The boy felt the recoil of the barrier and quickly dispersed it while rolling to the side of the beast and sent a solar beam at him, forcing it back. "Damn it," Midoriya grunted as he was starting to grow tired from all of this. "I can't use OFA as it seems like it can somehow absorb the damage of it, so I'm forced to use Celestial Homage. But it's very tiring after some time." He gritted his teeth and dodged Nomu's punch and fired off several beams of light that pierced the body of it, but it shrugged it off and screeched even louder, forcing him to cover his ears. Nomu used this opportunity to kill Midoriya, but was sent flying back as Midoriya fired off a huge beam of light. He dropped to his knees and panted. He then quickly sent a solar-infused roundhouse at Shigaraki, trying to kill him from behind, and then punched him with solar energy that sent him flying into Nomu. Midoriya then sent a Delaware smash at Kurogiri, who was slowly recovering from the earlier attack, only to incapacitate some more. "Why won't you die?" Shigaraki yelled at Midoriya, and Nomu charged once more at the young boy, but once again missed its punch as Midoriya parried the punch and sent a beam of light into Nomu's stomach, and then held his hand up to the sky and sent a massive ball of light that collided with the Nomu. A loud screech was heard as it made direct contact with the creature, but it didn't take it down, much to Midoriya's dismay. It was even angrier than before as it punched the tired Midoriya, sending the boy into the stairs. He coughed out blood as he impacted the stairs. The rough edges made it feel like he broke some of his bones, but he didn't care about that as he stood up. One of his eyes was closed as he breathed heavily while glaring at the villains. He grunted as he felt very tired from the fight, but he forced himself to continue forward as he sent a wave of light, hitting Nomu and sent it into Shigaraki. And then he clasped both of his hands together. Both were glowing as a beam of light came crashing down on them. "It's not over yet," he huffed out as he saw both of them. He took a step forward, but then a sudden pain shot through his left side as he grunted and got onto his knees as he spat out blood. He wiped his mouth with his PE uniform. "Damn it, I'm at my limit." Exhaustion and fatigue was overtaking his body. He dodged to the left, but wasn't fast enough and ended up getting smashed into the stairs as he groaned in pain as Nomu had him in his hands. He grunted as he tried to escape, but was unable to as he felt too tired to do anything. But he still tried as he sent a beam of light that pierced through Nomu's skin, but the creature kept on strangling the boy. Shigaraki's laugh could be heard as he made his way over to Midoriya, a smug grin plastered on his face. "What happened? Are you too tired to fight? Sad for you." He cackled as Nomu began to crush Midoriya, but the boy relented as he headbutted Nomu and sent a small bright light into the eye of it, forcing it to drop him. He then sent several beams of light that collided with the creature, but it seemed like it was doing nothing. He grunted in pain as he sent a cross wave of light that exploded in the thing's face. He was slowly losing himself as the exhaustion was becoming more and more challenging to combat. He created distance from the thing as he gripped his arm in pain and had one of his eyes open. He wiped some blood that was trickling down his forehead, and then he looked up, seeing the scared looks of Yaoyorozu as she had her eyes widened and tears were streaming down her face. Midoriya grunted as he got up and turned to face the villains. This time, even more grunts appeared than before and were making their way over to the top of the stairs. "Damn it, why are there so many of them here? Either way, they can't leave this building," Midoriya said, but then dropped to his knees and coughed out blood causing Yaoyorozu to run up to him with a worried expression, and tears was still building up at the corners of her eyes. "Stop, you're hurt, Midoriya," she said as she looked over him with worry in her eyes. He looked at her, then at the villains, and tried to get up, but fell face forward. He groaned and launched a wave of light that went down the stairs and caught a lot of villains. After quite a while, it exploded at the bottom of the stairs, sending a lot of villains away and putting them out of commission. Midoriya wheezed as he was just about ready to pass out, but Yaoyorozu gripped him, stopping him from going and fighting some more. "Are you all right, Midoriya?" He looked and saw Kirishima behind Bakugo as they ran over to the pair, defeating villains left and right. Also, Ice appeared and froze villains, and Todoroki appeared as he froze more people. The three boys stood in front of Midoriya and them as Bakugo looked down at Midoriya and smirked. "What happened, Deku? Can't handle some villains now?" he said tauntingly, which caused Yaoyorozu to uncharacteristically let out a growl as she glared at the blonde. But he didn't notice it as he was too busy looking at all of the villains with a wicked grin. Kirishima was pumped up as he got into his fighting stance, and Todoroki had his hand out as he was waiting for them to come so that he could freeze them. Shigaraki growled as he was getting beat by a bunch of students. "Damn it, why the foo underscore?" Doors were swung open as everyone looked at the entrance of the building. All Might appeared with his teeth clenched as he looked at his fallen comrades, then to his students, taking in the sights of their injuries, and then they landed on Midoriya and his current condition. Ida panted as he looked at everyone with a worried expression on his face. "Do not fear, for I am here." All Might ripped his tie off as he glared at Shigaraki, who had a massive grin on his face. The number one hero walked in front of Midoriya and them. "All Might," Midoriya muttered out before finally letting unconscious overtake him as he passed out in Yaoyorozu's arms. She gripped him tightly as she looked up at All Might, who was gritting his teeth. "I know you all were scared, but don't worry. I will be taking care of things now," he said, and then disappeared from the top of the stairs as he zoomed through the line's villains, instantly taking them out as gusts of wind intensified, creating a ton of wind pressure that blew back even more villains. Shigaraki watched the scene unfold and cackled loudly. "Nomu, there's your target. Kill him." Nomu screeched and charged at All Might, who saw this and followed suit. They both were at a standstill as they tried to overpower the other, but All Might used the strength of Nomu to his advantage and quickly dropped his attack, causing the Nomu to fall forward. Texas Smash. All Might punched the abdomen, but was surprised as Nomu took the hit like a champ and punched the hero in the face before ramming into him with its shoulders. It then tried to attack while All Might was down, but the hero quickly got up and punched it again. This time it still absorbed it, but it sustained some damage as the fight with Midoriya weakened it quite a bit, and Shigaraki saw this and yelled out in frustration. "Damn it, that brat weakened Nomu. How he fuck did he do that?" He was scratching his face and body very roughly as the frustration the villain gave off was immense. All Might punched Nomu in the face and then jumped away as the creature tried to grab him. California Smash. His heel connected with the top of Nomu's head, which caused it to screech in pain and anger as it landed some good hits on the hero, and that forced All Might back. Blood fell at the corner of his lip, which he wiped as he looked at the creature. He then dashed forward and quickly landed more punches on the thing, which the Nomu reciprocated as they basically had a punch-out. All Might felt the power of the creature, but he didn't falter as he increased the speed and power of the punches. He slowly overpowered Nomu, and with that he landed an uppercut and then smashed the thing into the ground, creating a small earthquake in the area. Nomu got up and then looked up to see All Might above him as he had his fist ready and wind picking up around the hero. Detroit Smash. His fist collided with the being as huge crash was heard, followed by cracks forming all the way to the stairs as All Might put everything in that punch as it pierced through Nomu's guard and connect with the head of it. A large amount of debris and dust kicked up. People shielded their bodies as the force of the punch sent a huge amount of wind that pushed everyone back. Yaoyorozu shielded Midoriya and herself from the dust as she held his body close to her and turned the other way. Shigaraki didn't even bother shielding his body as he was stomping the ground in rage as he saw that Nomu had been defeated when the dust cleared. "Damn it, what the fuck?" he yelled out, but then was shot in the knee and legs before Kurogiri, who had recovered, shielded him from the bullets. "We need to got, or we'll get caught," Kurogiri said. Shigaraki growled, but nodded as he then looked at the top of the stairs, more specifically, at Midoriya. "You may have won today, but the League of Villains will kill you all. Especially you, All Might, and that green-haired boy too," Shigaraki said, and Kurogiri teleported them out of there, leaving Nomu and the grunts behind. Snipe holstered his gun as the rest of the pro heroes had arrived and assisted the police force as they rounded up all the villains, including Nomu, and were also attending to the wounded. Out of all the students, only Midoriya required immediate attention, as he suffered the most injuries in the process, while all the rest of them had cuts or bruises, but nothing too serious. All Might watched them wheel in Midoriya to the ambulance, and Yaoyorozu opted to accompany them as they rushed out of there while the rest of the class was being brought in for questioning. "I'm sorry, young Midoriya. If I was here quicker, you wouldn't be in that condition, but I'm proud of you for protecting your friends and not giving up." All Might then looked as he saw his two companions, who were both in critical condition from the villain attack. Ito walked out of the area after he was questioned and met up with some of his classmates as they were sitting at the entrance of the building. None of them dared to say anything as they all sat in silence. Their faces had all the same expression on them: fear. They had faced a bunch of villains, and some of them nearly died from the attack. All of them were scared as they didn't have the experience that the stars of the class had. Ida remembered the condition of Midoriya's body and clenched his fist in self-disappointment. "All I did was get help from the academy, but Midoriya faced that creature all by himself, and even when he was injured tried to protect everyone else from getting hurt, or worse. I can probably say that, if Midoriya wasn't here, we'd probably be in serious condition, even killed." He sat next to Uraraka. She gave him a sad smile as she went back to looking at the ground for the time being. Yaoyorozu watched Midoriya's chest rise and fall slowly as she looked at his state, bandages covering most of his body, except for his face, and even then it had a small patch for his left eye. She lightly grasped his hand and gently squeezed it as she frowned at his current state. But she then looked at her own hands and clenched them as tears started to fall from her eyes. "I'm so useless. I couldn't do anything but watch as Midoriya was getting hurt from that thing." She looked glumly as she ended up crying herself to sleep at Midoriya's bedside. Several of the doctors, Toshinori, and Detective Tsukachi walked in, and they saw the girl sleeping alongside the bed. So they tried not to wake her as the doctors began to check up on the boy's condition before making their way out of the room to check on the two pro heroes. Toshinori and Tsukachi looked at the boy before walking out of the room. "So he's your successor, Toshi? He will have a rough time from here on out," the detective said as he leaned on a wall and looked at his friend, who was looking out the window in the lobby. "I'm sure he will be able to overcome anything that comes his way. You know, he kind of reminds me of you, Toshi. Rather, if that's good or bad, I can't say." "Yeah, he does too." Chapter 7. The Sports Festival. Midoriya groaned as he opened his eyes, only to be blinded by the bright light the sun was giving off, forcing him to close his eyes and close the curtains. He sighed and stretched his arms, noticing the bandages wrapped around his arms. Then he looked under the blankets and saw that he was wrapped in bandages. He ran his hand over the bandages, hissing in pain when he went over a tender spot. He then looked down at the other occupant in the room. Her light snores were heard as she had a frown on her face. He then placed his hand on her hand and started to slowly rub it, causing her frown to disappear, and a smile replaced it as she continued to rest, but now had a peaceful expression on her face. He sighed and looked at the tray next to him, which had breakfast for the two of them, from what he saw as it was covered with a lid. Seeing the food made his stomach growl as he looked at the delicious food, but then looked at it again. "From my experience, hospital food isn't that good, but I'm really hungry." He rubbed his stomach as he looked and saw that he wasn't hooked up to anything, so he got out of the hospital bed and grabbed one of the trays. He opened it, releasing a buildup of steam which wafted in his direction. He sighed in delight as it smelled really good. But he wasn't getting his hopes up as he took a bite out of the pancakes and deadpanned as he swallowed the food before putting the lid back on and placed it back on the cart. "That was horrible," he muttered as he looked at his sleeping occupant and walked over to her. He looked at her peaceful expression and felt guilty for waking her, but it was almost time for school as he checked his phone. He gently shook her, but she whined and told him to stop. He chuckled and shook her again. This time she stretched and muttered something about hating mornings as she yawned, stretching her arms as she let out a satisfied moan. She then looked at the person who awoken her, and her eyes widened as he smiled. "Midoriya," she said as her eyes started to tear up, causing him to feel a bit guilty. "Yaoyorozu." He looked at her as the tears started to fall down her face. But her face had the biggest smile he had ever seen as she stood up and knocked him onto the bed as she wrapped her arms around his neck as she pressed herself onto him tightly. He was blushing like a madman, but he slowly wrapped his arms around her waist and pulled her in tightly as they both held each other tightly, not noticing the audience that they had peeking behind the door. "That's it, my boy," All Might whispered to Inko, who was still surprised as she was talking to her son's idol and the #1 hero in the world. When she heard that he was in the hospital, she immediately bolted to see if her son was okay, meeting the hero himself shortly after arriving the hospital. Needless to say, she was very honored to meet him. "She is very beautiful. To think, my son got a girl this beautiful. I'm so happy," she said as she grabbed her handkerchief and wiped her eyes. After a while of spying on her son, Inko knocked on the door and opened it, seeing the red faces of the two occupants as they were sitting next to each other with their hands in their smiled at the pair and handed Midoriya a school uniform and a lunchbox, which was All Might themed, causing the said hero to snicker outside the room. "I'm so glad that you're all right, Izuku. And who is your beautiful friend? I assume she's from UA as well," Inko said, and noticed the blushes on their faces grow ever more red. She chuckled softly and looked at Yaoyorozu, who stood up and bowed. "Hello, Mrs. Midoriya, I'm Momo Yaoyorozu," Yaoyorozu said as she bowed and smiled at the mother. Midoriya looked at his mother with embarrassment, but couldn't agree on her statement. He then grabbed his uniform and headed to the bathroom in the room. Yaoyorozu watched as he entered the bathroom and sighed as she sat down on the bed, not noticing Inko's sly smile as she also sat down on the bed and looked at the girl. "You like my son, don't you, Yaoyorozu?" Inko asked the girl, taking in the immediate reaction that she displayed. Her whole face turned instantly red as she started to stutter, but she stopped once the older woman chuckled and placed her hand on the girl's shoulder. "Don't worry, my Izuku always talks about you when we have dinner. He always talks about how amazing you are and how beautiful you are. I can see why my son likes you," Inko said, causing the girl to blush even further, but she also looked at Inko with curiosity. "Wait, Midoriya likes me?" Yaoyorozu finished her sentence with a massive blush on her face as she placed both of her hands on her cheeks, causing Inko to chuckle and nodded. "Oh yes, he never had a crush before, but you're his first now, and I approve of you. Please, take care of my son," Inko said as she bowed to Yaoyorozu, causing the girl to quickly shake her head as she wasn't used to this, but she heard the genuine concern for her son, and that brought a smile to her face. Yaoyorozu tapped the mother's shoulder, causing her to look up. "Of course, Mrs. Midoriya." She smiled and nodded. "Please, call me Inko, I insist. Anyways, you two should probably get to school as it's about to start. And please, if you can, stop by and have dinner with us someday. I'm sure my son will love to have you over." Inko smiled as she looked at Midoriya, who had just walked out of the bathroom, and hugged him before walking out of the room. Midoriya smiled and looked over at Yaoyorozu, who was twiddling with her thumbs and had a massive blush on her face, but she was also smiling. She looked up at him and smiled wider, causing Midoriya to lose his breath. Was she ever this beautiful? I felt like she's even more beautiful than before. Midoriya blushed and grabbed his bag, which his mom also left, and looked at Yaoyorozu, who was looking at the ground. He looked at her and walked up to her. "Hey, are you okay?" He couldn't finish his sentence as he felt a pair of lips on his. His mind started to malfunction as he felt Yaoyorozu kissing him, his whole body feeling like jello as he struggled to comprehend what was happening. But his instincts took over and he slowly closed his eyes, pressing his lips onto her as they kissed for a couple more seconds until they were forced to pull back from the lack of airflow. Both of them were panting as they both looked at each other and blushed, but they both were smiling as they interlocked hands. "So, I guess we're a thing now," Midoriya said, but Yaoyorozu shook her head and looked at him expectingly. He looked confused, but then it hit him like a truck. Midoriya cleared his throat and pulled her closer to him. Momo Yaoyorozu, will you be my girlfriend? Midoriya stuttered the last part out, but Yaoyorozu didn't care as she happily wrapped her arms around his neck and pulled his face closer to hers. Of course, Midoriya. She was blushing like a schoolgirl, but she was very happy and pressed her lips onto his once more, both pouring their feelings into the kiss. He tasted strawberries, and he liked it as he pulled her even closer as she wrapped her arms around his neck tighter. They were simply enjoying the other's embrace as they pulled back with another sigh of relief. Midoriya smiled at her before checking his watch, and his eyes widened. Crap, we have about 5 minutes until class starts, he said to Yaoyorozu, who also was shocked, and they sprinted out of the hospital, not knowing if Midoriya was discharged from the hospital. But they didn't care as they sped to the academy. But at the rate they were going to be late for class, and that wasn't good as they were the representatives of the class. Midoriya was thinking of a way for them to get there in time, until he suddenly stopped, causing Yaoyorozu to stop. Why'd you stop, Izuku? She asked as he bent down and looked at her. Get on, Yaoyorozu. I'm going to get us there. She looked at him incredulously, but she quickly got on and grabbed Midoriya's bag as she wrapped her arms around her neck after placing both their bags on her little hanger that she made just now. Hold on. He powered OFA through his leg, and he took off, racing past people as he sped past, and within a couple of seconds, they were almost there. Yaoyorozu was holding on tightly as she was scared, but also was enjoying it as she never felt this before, and it felt nice to piggyback ride on Midoriya. They made it past the gates, and Midoriya stopped as Yaoyorozu hopped off, and they made a dash for their classroom, getting there shortly before the bell rang. Both of them panting as everyone was looking at them. Some had a look of suspicion, while Ida was doing his weird hand motions as he walked up to the two of them. As class representatives, you should be the first ones here, and yet both of you were almost late for class, Ida exclaimed, while the rest of the class let out a sigh of exasperation. After that, all three of them sat down as the bell rang, signaling that class had started. Who do you think is going to be teaching homeroom, Sue? Ashido said as she leaned her chair back to the point where Sue placed her hands on it from going too far back. I don't know, Karo. Mr. Aizawa should still be in the hospital, Sue said as the doors to the classroom opened, revealing Aizawa, wrapped in bandages from head to toe, as he slowly made his way to the front of the class and then looked at everyone. All right. It's a new day, but your battle isn't over yet. Several students began to panic as they thought that there was another villain attack happening. Are you freaking kidding me? Mineta shouted out, tears in his eyes as he thought he was going to die. Several murmurs of uneasiness rang through the class as they waited for Aizawa to explain. I'm referring to the sports festival. Sighs of relief was heard. Mineta was still flipping out from the lack of context beforehand. They're still doing it after what happened at the USJ? Jiro asked. They're still doing it as a sign that we've dealt with the situation, plus security will be beefed up than previous years. However, this will be the time for you to shine. This is an important event, so you better give your best effort if you want to be a pro hero. Stand out from the rest, get noticed by the hero agencies. It will begin in 2 weeks. Be prepared to do your best at the festival. Class dismissed, Aizawa said as he then left the classroom, dragging his sleeping bag with him. Oh man, I'm so pumped for this event, Kirishima said to Shiro, Sato, and Kaminari. Midoriya looked at everyone as he looked at his notebook he created during Aizawa's little lecture over the sports festival. The notebook had a plan for training over the 2-week period, and he smiled at it after making an optimal plan. He smiled as felt psyched for the event. Over the 2 weeks leading up to the festival, Midoriya was primarily focusing on his lunar powers, more specifically, his defensive capabilities during the day, figuring out how to use it effectively alongside his solar powers. So, he spent most of the 2 weeks coming up with abilities that would further enhance his combat prowess, while also building up his body, but he didn't forget to train OFA for at least an hour over the weeks. But, there was an uneasy tension running through his mind as he trained celestial homage, and his weapons as well, but he always had this unshakable feeling that he wasn't tapping into his true potential, and that irked him. Damn it, he yelled out as he watched his moonlight barrier was shattered so easily by a cannon that Yaoyorozu had made as she wanted to help him. The sun was beating down on him as he created another barrier and once again did the exact same test, which also yielded the exact same result. Frustrated, He threw his water bottle as the contents spilled all over the ground, causing his companion to run over to him in concern. She saw him clenching his fist as he looked at the thrown water bottle. "What am I doing wrong?" Midoriya asked as he went over to his bag and grabbed his notebook for himself and flipped through the pages until he got to his lunar section and looked at everything that he had written down. Yaoyorozu looked over his shoulder and watched as he furiously wrote down notes and started to sigh, burying his head into his hands and yelled out in frustration. She looked concerned, but she grabbed his notebook and started to look at everything he had written down in both sections. She looked hard, and a light bulb suddenly went off in her head. "Maybe you're thinking this wrong, Izuku. Instead of thinking them as two separate quirks, think of them as a conjoining quirk. You rhetoric in the notes make it seem like you're just pushing one of them away while you're training. I read in a book that the sun and moon are opposites, but they also complement each other in many different ways. The yin and yang symbol can represent the light and darkness of the sun and moon, respectively. I think you should incorporate both of lunar and solar, with of course the time of day in consideration," Yaoyorozu said. Midoriya looked at her in shock before suddenly picking her up and spun her around, a large smile on his face. She was blushing hard, but had a huge smile on her face as she wrapped her arms around his neck. "I can't believe my answer was right in front of me," Midoriya said as he stopped spinning her, but his smile never leaving his face. Yaoyorozu blushed even harder as he let her down and ran over to his notes and started to rip out pages out of the notebook until she ran up to him alarmed and saw that he had ripped out the pages for his quirk and started to write new ones. After a couple of minutes, he smiled and nodded, then looked over to her and nodded. She saw the intensity in his eyes and smiled at her boyfriend before giving him a serious look and created a whole line of cannons. Midoriya looked at the line, but he kept his focus as he felt a weight has been lifted from his shoulders as he suddenly created a barrier, this time infused with the powers of the moon being backed up by the powers of the sun. His whole demeanor changed as his eyes were now a dance of silver and yellow. The sun started to glow even brighter as he looked at Yaoyorozu and nodded. She nodded and fired all of the cannons, a wave of cannonballs rushing towards the green-haired boy. But he calmed his nerves, clearing his mind, and imagined that the barrier was impenetrable. All of a sudden, he saw what appeared to be two figures placing their hands on the barrier, and it somehow empowered the barrier. Midoriya focused all of his energy and watched as the cannonballs impacted the shield, shattering almost all of them, except for one as he absorbed it and molded it into energy. He disengaged the barrier and didn't even feel tired. In fact, he felt rejuvenated. "Izuku." Yaoyorozu ran over to him and leaped into his arms. They held each other, smiles on both of their faces as Midoriya felt the connection with the sun grow, and he assumed his connection with the moon would be the same. He shook his head and smiled as he felt great about his quirk. After letting Yaoyorozu down, he then started to practice some more barriers and began to gauge how wide and large the barriers can be to get a good feel on the parameters. As his solar powers began to develop more and more, Midoriya was able to figure out numerous advantages his quirk had. First, he could make himself invisible by using the sun as a camouflage while he exerted light from his body, and that ends with him being able to be invisible to the naked eye. Second, he also noticed that he was a lot faster whenever he's using his solar powers, and combined with his ability to hide his movements and omit any sound that he makes with his lunar powers, soon he was able to make that into a pretty useful trick. For his lunar powers, he was able to move stealthily anywhere he went and was able to be one with the darkness. He was also able to track anyone once he got their scent, and was able to some amount of control over gravity during nighttime. After that, he kept on figuring out more and more of his quirk, finding out things like levitation, reflection, and refraction to name a few. He also continued his research over the sun and moon, learning that he could also heal with his lunar powers, but they are less potent than solar healing. He also took mental note that he could surround himself with an aura that could protect his body and his mental state as well. He also was discovering new myths and legends about the sun and the moon, however was unsuccessful in finding